Hi everyone, welcome to Yellow Fan. I hope you're all doing well. Today, I want to make the case that The Simpsons isn't just a good show, or even a great show. It is, by almost every measure that matters, the greatest television show ever made. And I don't say that lightly. Over the next few hours, I'm going to walk you through exactly why, covering everything from how the show started as a tiny animation nobody expected to succeed, to how it built the most talented writing room in comedy history, to how it completely changed the English language, predicted real-world events, won more awards than any animated series ever, and created an entire genre of television that didn't exist before it showed up. By the end of this, I think you'll agree that no show has ever come close to doing what The Simpsons did. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. From a 30-second sketch to the longest running scripted show in American history. To really understand why The Simpsons became what it became, you have to go back to the very beginning. And the beginning is a lot smaller and stranger than most people realize. Because The Simpsons didn't start as a big Hollywood production. It didn't start with a huge budget or a massive team. It started as a rough, crude, barely animated set of 30-second cartoon clips on a variety show that most people have completely forgotten about. The man behind it all was a cartoonist named Matt Groening. Before The Simpsons, Groening was known for a comic strip called Life in Hell. It was an underground comic, meaning it wasn't in the big newspapers or anything like that. It was the kind of thing you'd find in alternative weekly papers, with a small but loyal following. The comics were sharp and funny, full of observations about life, relationships, work, and all the things that quietly drive people crazy. It wasn't mainstream by any stretch, but it caught the attention of people in the entertainment world who recognized that Groening had a real talent for comedy. One of those people was a television producer named James L. Brooks. Now, Brooks was already a giant in the industry at that point. He was the man behind The Mary Tyler Moore Show, one of the most successful comedies in television history. He had also directed the film As Good as It Gets. The guy knew comedy, and he knew talent when he saw it. Brooks reached out to Groening and asked him to create a series of short animated segments for a show called The Tracy Ullman Show, which was airing on the Fox network. The idea was simple. These little animated bits would play between the live-action sketches on the show. Quick, funny, easy to produce. Now here is where things get interesting. Originally, Brooks wanted Groening to adapt his Life in Hell comic strip for these animated segments. That would have made sense. Groening already had characters, he already had a style, and it would have been a natural fit. But Groening made a decision that ended up changing television forever. He didn't want to give up the rights to Life in Hell. He had built that comic from the ground up, and handing it over to a television network meant he could lose control of something he had created and cared about. So instead of adapting Life in Hell, Groening came up with something completely new. He created a family. A yellow, four-fingered, wildly dysfunctional American family. He named the parents Homer and Marge after his own real-life parents. The sisters were named Lisa and Maggie after his own real-life sisters. And the troublemaking son was named Bart, which is an anagram of the word. Groening sketched these characters out quickly, and that was it. That was the birth of The Simpsons. Not in some grand writer's room or fancy studio, just a cartoonist making a quick decision to protect his other work, and accidentally creating the most important animated family in history. The first Simpsons shorts aired on The Tracy Ullman Show in 1987, and honestly, if you go back and watch them now, they are rough. The animation is stiff and basic. The characters don't quite look like the versions we all know today. Homer's design is noticeably different. The voices are still being figured out. Everything about it feels like a work in progress, because that's exactly what it was. But even in those early, crude little clips, there was something there. The humor was sharp. The family dynamic felt real, even though they were bright yellow cartoon characters. People responded to it. Audiences liked these weird little segments, and Fox took notice. It took about 2 years, but eventually the network made the call to give The Simpsons its own standalone show, a full half-hour, primetime slot on the Fox network. The series premiere aired on December 17, 1989, with a Christmas special called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. That episode set the tone for everything that would follow. It was funny, yes, but it was also surprising surprisingly emotional. The plot was simple. Homer doesn't get his Christmas bonus at work, and the family doesn't have enough money for presents. He tries to make extra cash at the dog track, loses everything, but ends up adopting a greyhound named Santa's Little Helper, who becomes the family pet. It was a small story about a family struggling with money at Christmas, and it hit people right in the heart. After that Christmas special, the first regular season began airing in January 1990, and almost immediately, something remarkable happened. The show took off. Not just a little bit, it became a full-blown cultural event. Bart Simpson became a national icon almost overnight. Kids were wearing Bart Simpson t-shirts to school. His catchphrases were everywhere. Quote 2, quote 3, quote 4. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing that spiky-haired kid's face on something, and the show was pulling in massive ratings. The episode Quote 5 from the second season drew an estimated 33.6 million viewers, making it the most watched episode in the history of the Fox network at that time. But here's the thing that really made The Simpsons special from the start. It wasn't just a kid's show. It wasn't just a cartoon. It was genuinely brilliant comedy that worked on multiple levels. Kids could watch it and laugh at Homer falling down or Bart pulling pranks. But adults could watch the same episode and catch layers of social commentary, political jokes, and cultural references that went completely over younger viewers' heads. This was something television had never really seen before. An animated show that was funny enough for a child, but smart enough for a college professor. And that combination is what turned it from a hit show into something much bigger. Alongside Groening, the show was shaped by Sam Simon, a talented television writer and producer who helped develop the series and build out the world of Springfield, and of course James L. Brooks, who stayed on as executive producer. Brooks did something incredibly important early on that would define the entire future of the show. He negotiated a clause in the contract with Fox that said the network could not interfere with the show's content. That meant the writers had complete creative freedom. They could write whatever they wanted. They could make fun of politicians, corporations, celebrities, and even Fox itself, and nobody at the network could stop them. This was almost unheard of in television, and it gave The Simpsons a fearlessness that set it apart from every other show on the air. That fearlessness showed up right away. The show mocked everything. It made fun of television itself, of American consumer culture, of politics, of religion, of the nuclear family ideal that shows like Leave It to Beaver had spent decades building up. And it did all of this while being an animated show on a network that was still trying to establish itself as a serious player. Fox was the new kid on the block in the late 1980s. It was the fourth broadcast network in a world that had been dominated by NBC, CBS, and ABC for decades. Fox needed a breakout hit to prove it belonged, and The Simpsons became exactly that. Media experts have described the show as the single most important program in establishing Fox as a legitimate broadcast television network. Without The Simpsons, the Fox network as we know it might not exist today. The show was so popular that Fox made a bold and risky move. They took The Simpsons off its Sunday night slot and moved it to Thursday nights at 8 p.m., putting it directly up against The Cosby Show on NBC, which was the #1 show in all of television at the time. The media called it Bart versus Bill, and it became one of the biggest television rivalries of the era. News outlets across the country covered the showdown, and while The Cosby Show technically won the ratings battle in that time slot, the fact that a cartoon, an animated show about a yellow family, could even compete with the biggest live-action sitcom in America told the world that something had fundamentally changed in television. And the show just kept going. Season after season, year after year, decade after decade. It outlasted The Cosby Show. It outlasted Friends. It outlasted Seinfeld. It outlasted every single sitcom that came and went during the 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s. As of today, The Simpsons is the longest-running American animated series in history. It is the longest-running American sitcom in history. And it is the longest-running American scripted primetime television series in history, both by number of seasons and by number of individual episodes. It recently hit 800 episodes, a milestone that no other scripted show has come anywhere near. And in 2025, Fox renewed it for 4 more seasons, which will bring the total episode count to 858. The show has been broadcast in over 100 countries and translated into dozens of languages. It has won 37 Primetime Emmy Awards, 34 Annie Awards, and 2 Peabody Awards. It was the first animated series to ever receive a Peabody. The Simpson family received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in the year 2000. It spawned a feature film in 2007, The Simpsons Movie, which made over $500 million at the worldwide box office, with a sequel set to come out in 2027. On top of all of that, it built a merchandising empire worth over $1 billion. Video games, comic books, theme park rides, clothing, toys, and just about anything else you can put a logo on. All of this from a set of rough 30-second sketches on a variety show that most people have forgotten. A cartoonist who didn't want to give up his underground comic strip accidentally created the most successful animated franchise in the history of television. The journey from those crude little clips on the Tracy Ullman Show to 800 episodes and $1 billion empire is one of the most unlikely success stories in all of entertainment. And it all happened because the show was, at its core, something genuinely special, something that connected with people in a way that no animated show had ever done before. __quote_7__, but none of this would have been possible without the people who actually wrote the jokes, built the stories, and turned Springfield into a living, breathing world. And the story of The Simpsons writers' room, the people inside it, and the legendary episodes that came out of it is just as wild as the show itself. Section 2. The writers' room that produced the funniest television ever made. If you ask anyone who knows television why The Simpsons became the greatest show ever, the answer almost always comes back to the same thing: the writing. Not the animation, not the voice acting, although both of those were excellent. The writing. The scripts that came out of The Simpsons, especially during its early years, were some of the sharpest, funniest, most cleverly constructed pieces of comedy that had ever been put on screen. And the people responsible for that writing were not just good. They were some of the most talented comedy minds of their generation, many of whom went on to become massive names in entertainment long after they left the show. To understand how The Simpsons writing room worked, you first have to understand the kind of people who ended up in it. This was not a room full of random comedy writers who happened to get lucky. From the very beginning, the show attracted an unusually high level of talent. Many of the writers came from places like the Harvard Lampoon, which is a famous humor magazine at Harvard University that has been a training ground for some of the biggest names in American comedy for over 100 years. These were people who had been writing and performing comedy at an elite level since they were teenagers. And when they came together in one room to work on The Simpsons, something special happened. The show was developed by Matt Groening, James L. Brooks, and Sam Simon. While Groening created the characters and the world, and Brooks brought his decades of experience producing hit comedies, it was Sam Simon who played a huge role in shaping the tone and structure of the early show. Simon was an experienced television writer who had worked on shows like Cheers, which was one of the biggest sitcoms of the 1980s. He helped develop the characters beyond Groening's original sketches, fleshing out who they were, how they talked, and how they related to each other. He helped build Springfield from a simple backdrop into a rich, detailed world full of memorable people. Simon's contribution to The Simpsons in those early seasons is something that doesn't always get the attention it deserves. But the people who worked on the show have consistently acknowledged how important he was to making it what it became. But the real magic of The Simpsons happened in the writer's room itself. And the way that room worked was different from most other shows. The Simpsons used a very collaborative process. A writer might come in with an idea or a first draft of a script, but then that script would get rewritten by the entire room together. Every joke would be tested, reworked, thrown out, and replaced. Every story beat would be debated and refined. The goal was to make sure that by the time a script was finished, it had been through so many rounds of improvement that every single line was as strong as it could possibly be. This is why Simpsons episodes from the early years feel so dense with humor. It's not one person's vision. It's the combined effort of an entire room full of brilliant comedy writers, all pushing each other to be funnier and sharper. Now, the most famous writer to come out of that room is probably Conan O'Brien. Before he became one of the most recognizable talk show hosts in the world, Conan was a comedy writer. He had graduated from Harvard University, where he served as the president of the Harvard Lampoon, and he was only the second person in 85 years to hold that position twice. After Harvard, he wrote for Saturday Night Live on NBC. But in 1991, after a pilot he wrote didn't get picked up, O'Brien found himself without a job. That's when he was brought into the Simpsons writer's room. He was there for about 2 years, working on seasons 4 and 5. And those 2 seasons just happened to fall right in the middle of what fans and critics call the show's golden age. During his time on the show, O'Brien wrote some of the most beloved episodes in the entire series. His first credited episode was quote 8 in season 4, which follows Bart developing a crush on his new neighbor Laura Powers, while Homer sues an all-you-can-eat restaurant for false advertising. It's a great episode, but it was his next one that really cemented his place in Simpsons history. Marge vs. the Monorail is widely considered one of the greatest Simpsons episodes ever made, and some would say one of the greatest episodes of any television show, period. The plot follows Springfield receiving $3 million after Mr. Burns gets caught dumping toxic waste, and instead of spending it wisely, the town gets talked into building a monorail by a smooth-talking con artist named Lyle Lanley, voiced by the legendary Phil Hartman. The episode features a catchy musical number inspired by The Music Man, and nearly every single line in it is quotable. O'Brien loved that musical element so much that years later, when he hosted the Emmy Awards in 2006, he did his own version of the same tune. O'Brien's final full episode was, quote, 10 in season 5, where Homer fails an employee evaluation and gets sent to college by Mr. Burns, only to befriend a group of students and cause chaos on campus. He also contributed to the 4th Treehouse of Horror Halloween special, although by that point, he was already preparing to leave the show. In 1993, O'Brien was named as the replacement for David Letterman on NBC's Late Night, and he left The Simpsons to begin his career as a talk show host. But even though his time on the staff was short, only about 2 years, his influence on the show was enormous. His style of absurd, high-energy comedy helped push The Simpsons in a more wild and unpredictable direction during a time when the show was evolving from grounded family comedy into something more daring and strange. Other writers and producers on the show have said that O'Brien's contributions could be felt even in classic episodes he didn't personally write, like the beloved Cape Fear from season 5, because his energy and ideas were part of the room every day. O'Brien later talked about his time on the show on his podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. When his guest Ed Sheeran asked about the experience, O'Brien gave a hilarious description of what the writer's room was actually like, and it wasn't what you'd expect. You'd think the room where some of the funniest television in history was written would be this amazing, impressive space. It wasn't. O'Brien described it as awful. He said there was bad shag carpet on the floor. The sofas looked like the kind of furniture you'd pick up off the sidewalk during your first year of college. The writers sat around eating fried food all day. One writer who sat right next to O'Brien smoked constantly, and O'Brien joked that when he eventually dies, it'll be because of that guy. He said the whole experience was not glamorous or cool or exciting in any way. At one point, the writers got so bored while trying to come up with ideas that they chewed up a bunch of caramel, mashed it all together into a big blob, stuck it to the ceiling, and then tried to get other things to stick to it, just to pass the time. But that's the thing about creative genius. It doesn't need a fancy room. It doesn't need comfortable furniture or healthy food or clean air. It just needs the right people in the same place at the same time. And that's what The Simpsons had. Some of the funniest scripts ever written for any medium came out of a room that looked like a run-down college apartment, because the people in that room were operating at a level that most comedy writers can only dream about. O'Brien wasn't the only notable writer by any means. The Simpsons writing staff over the years included an incredible number of talented people. Al Jean, who would go on to become the show's longest-serving showrunner, was there from the very beginning. Mike Reiss, who served as showrunner alongside Jean during seasons 3 and 4, was a major force during the Golden Age. John Swartzwelder, who is widely considered one of the most prolific and naturally funny writers in the show's history, wrote more episodes than anyone else. Jeff Martin, George Meyer, David Merkin, Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, and many others all contributed to making the show what it was. Each of these writers brought something different to the table, and the collaborative process of the room meant that all of those different comedic styles and perspectives got blended together into something greater than any single person could have created alone. The show also had a very specific first episode story that shows just how unusual its path was. The very first episode of The Simpsons, the Christmas special Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, was written by a woman named Mimi Pond. She wrote the script that introduced the world to the Simpson family in their own standalone show. But unfortunately, that would end up being her only writing credit on the series. Despite literally writing the episode that launched one of the biggest shows in history, she never wrote another episode. It's one of those strange pieces of television trivia that reminds you how unpredictable and sometimes unfair the entertainment industry can be. The quality of the writing on The Simpsons was recognized early and often by the industry. The show won 13 Writers Guild of America awards over its run. The animation writing category was introduced in 2003, and The Simpsons quickly dominated it, winning the award from 2004 all the way through 2010, and then again from 2012 to 2015. That is an absolutely absurd level of consistency. Year after year, the writers of The Simpsons were being told by their peers in the industry that what they were doing was the best writing in animation, and in many cases, the best writing in all of comedy television. And here's something that really puts the quality of the writing into perspective. In 1993, after the show had already been running for several years and was clearly one of the best comedies on television, the producers decided to try submitting episodes for the Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series, not Outstanding Animated Program, which is the category the show usually competed in. Outstanding Comedy Series. That's the big one. The category where The Simpsons would have been going up against live-action shows, sitcoms with real actors on real sets. They submitted episodes like quote 13 and quote 14, both of which are considered classics. But The Simpsons didn't get nominated. The Emmy voters at the time simply weren't ready to put an animated show in the same category as live-action comedies. Several critics at the time called it one of the biggest snubs of the year. The producers tried again the next year and got the same result. After that, they gave up and went back to competing in the animation category. It's a fascinating piece of history because it shows that even at its absolute peak, when The Simpsons was writing circles around most live-action shows on television, there was still a barrier in people's minds about what a cartoon could be. That barrier, by the way, is something The Simpsons spent its entire existence breaking down, and the tool it used to do it was always the same: the writing. Every character, every storyline, every throwaway joke in the background of a scene, it all came from that writer's room. It came from people who were obsessed with being funny, who challenged each other constantly, who rewrote scripts until they were polished to perfection, and who did all of this while sitting on terrible sofas, eating terrible food, and breathing in secondhand smoke. The room was a mess, but what came out of it was perfection. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 15, underscore, underscore, underscore. The result of all that work, all that talent, and all that dedication was what fans and critics now call the golden age of The Simpsons. A stretch of seasons so consistently brilliant that many people consider it the single greatest run in the history of television comedy. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. Section 3. The Golden Age. Why Seasons 3 through 8 are flawless television. There's a debate that Simpsons fans have been having for decades. It comes up every single time people talk about the show. When exactly was The Simpsons at its absolute best? When was it firing on all cylinders, producing episode after episode of perfect comedy without a single miss? The answer changes slightly depending on who you ask. Some people say the first 10 seasons. Some people stretch it out a little further. But the most common answer, the one that comes up again and again from critics, fans, writers, and even people who worked on the show, is seasons 3 through 8. That stretch from roughly 1991 to 1997 is what everyone calls the Golden Age. And when you actually go back and look at what the show was doing during those years, it becomes very clear very quickly that this wasn't just a great run of television, it was the greatest run of comedy that any show has ever produced. To understand why the Golden Age was so special, you first have to understand what the show was like before it started. The first 2 seasons of The Simpsons are good. They have some genuinely classic episodes and some truly emotional moments. Simpsons roasting on an open fire from season 1 set the template for what the show could be. Moaning Lisa gave us our first real look at Lisa Simpson as a complex, thoughtful character dealing with real feelings. Season 2 gave us Lisa's Substitute, which is one of the most heartfelt episodes the show ever made, and Bart the Daredevil, which features Homer's famous fall into Springfield Gorge, a scene that people still talk about to this day. But during those first 2 seasons, the show was still figuring itself out. The animation was a little rough. The humor was a bit slower. The characters hadn't fully become the versions of themselves that everyone fell in love with. Homer was a little more grumpy and a little less lovably foolish. Bart was a little more of a straightforward troublemaker and a little less of the complex kid he'd become later. The show was finding its feet, and it was doing a great job of it, but it hadn't quite reached its full potential yet. Then season 3 happened, and everything clicked into place. Starting with season 3, The Simpsons went through a transformation. The writing got tighter, the jokes got sharper, the stories got more ambitious, and most importantly, the show figured out exactly what it wanted to be. It was no longer just a family sitcom that happened to be animated. It became a full-blown comedy machine that could do anything. It could tell a heartfelt story about a father trying to connect with his daughter, and then, in the very next episode, it could go completely off the rails with an absurd adventure that had nothing to do with reality. It could do biting political commentary one week and pure slapstick the next. It could make you laugh and make you feel something real, sometimes in the same scene. That flexibility, that ability to be whatever it needed to be in any given moment, is what made the Golden Age so remarkable. The showrunners during this era played a huge role in making it happen. Al Jean and Mike Reiss ran seasons 3 and 4 together, and they brought a sharp, fast-paced style of comedy that raised the bar for every episode. David Merkin took over for seasons 5 and 6 and pushed the show in an even more absurd and daring direction, embracing bigger and wilder storylines while still keeping the emotional core intact. Then Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein ran seasons 7 and 8, maintaining that incredible level of quality while adding their own sensibility to the mix. Each pair of showrunners brought something slightly different to the table, but they all shared the same commitment to making every single episode as good as it could possibly be. And the episodes that came out of this era speak for themselves. Season 3 gave us Homer at the Bat, where Mr. Burns recruits a team of real Major League Baseball players to win a company softball game, and every single one of them ends up being taken out by ridiculous circumstances before the big game. Roger Clemens gets hypnotized into thinking he's a chicken. Steve Sachs gets arrested by Springfield's police for every unsolved crime in the city. It's pure comedy gold from start to finish, packed with so many jokes that you genuinely miss half of them the first time you watch it. That same season gave us Quote 21, where Homer invents a cocktail and Moe steals the recipe, turning his bar into the hottest spot in Springfield. And it gave us Quote 22, where Bart tricks the entire town into thinking a boy is trapped down a well, and the whole thing spirals out of control. Season 4 is where many fans say the show truly peaked. This is the season that gave us Quote 23, written by Conan O'Brien, which we already talked about. But that was far from the only classic. A Streetcar Named Desire, where Marge stars in a local musical, is a brilliant mix of high culture references and family comedy. Last Exit to Springfield is considered by many fans and critics to be the single greatest Simpsons episode of all time. In that episode, Homer accidentally becomes the union leader at the nuclear power plant and goes head-to-head with Mr. Burns in a labor dispute. The writing in that episode is so layered and so dense with references and jokes that entire essays have been written about it. Mr. Plow sees Homer start a snowplowing business, only for Barney to become his rival. The jingle Homer records for his business became one of the most quoted pieces of Simpsons dialogue ever. And the season finale, Krusty Gets Cancelled, brought in real celebrities like Johnny Carson, Bette Midler, Hugh Hefner, and others playing themselves in a story about Krusty the Clown trying to save his failing show. Every single episode in that season felt like a home run. Season 5 continued the streak without dropping the ball even slightly. Cape Fear is one of the greatest Sideshow Bob episodes ever made. Bob, voiced by Kelsey Grammer, gets released from prison and stalks the Simpson family with murderous intent, leading them into the Witness Protection Program. The episode is a perfect send-up of the thriller genre, and it contains what many people consider the funniest visual gag in the entire series, the legendary scene where Sideshow Bob keeps stepping on rakes and getting hit in the face, over and over and over again. It's a joke that shouldn't work for as long as it goes on, but it just gets funnier every single time. That same season gave us Homer Goes to College, Conan O'Brien's last full episode, and Deep Space Homer, where Homer becomes an astronaut and goes to space. The show was confident enough to put Homer in literally any situation, no matter how ridiculous, and still make it feel like it belonged. Season 6 is often cited as the best single season of the entire show, and it's hard to argue against that. __quote _ 31 _ is a perfect parody of theme parks where everything goes horribly wrong. Quote _32 quote sends Homer into a secret society called the Stonecutters, with a musical number that became instantly iconic. Quote underscore 33 underscore was the season finale and became one of the biggest events in 1990s television. It was a two-part mystery that crossed over into Season 7, and it generated the kind of excitement and speculation that you normally only see with live-action prestige dramas. People were genuinely debating and arguing over who shot Mr. Burns all summer long. A cartoon did that. An animated comedy about a yellow family created the kind of cultural event that most shows could only dream of. And the hits kept coming. Quote underscore 34 underscore in Season 7 was an episode that dealt with personal beliefs and conviction without ever getting preachy or heavy-handed. Lisa decides to stop eating meat and has to deal with nobody around her understanding or supporting her choice. Paul McCartney and his wife Linda guest starred in the episode, and McCartney actually had a condition for his appearance. He would only do it if Lisa stayed a vegetarian permanently, and the show honored that request. Lisa has been a vegetarian ever since. Quote underscore 35 underscore from Season 8 introduced Hank Scorpio, one of the most beloved one-off characters in the show's history. He's Homer's friendly, easygoing boss, who just happens to be a James Bond-style villain trying to take over the world, and Homer is too clueless to notice. The episode is consistently ranked as one of the funniest in the entire series. Season 8 also gave us Homer's Enemy, an episode that stands out because it's darker and more thoughtful than almost anything the show had done before. It introduces Frank Grimes, a man who has worked hard his entire life and has nothing to show for it, and he's forced to work alongside Homer Simpson, a lazy, incompetent man who somehow has a house, a family, a job at a nuclear plant, and has even been to space. Grimes can't understand how Homer keeps failing upward while he suffers, despite doing everything right, and his frustration slowly drives him to a breakdown. It's a funny episode, but it's also uncomfortable in a way that the show rarely was, because it forces you to look at Homer through someone else's eyes and realize just how absurd his life really is. Many critics point to this episode as the moment where the show reached its deepest level of commentary about the American dream and what it means to succeed or fail. What made the Golden Age so special wasn't just that these individual episodes were great, it was that the quality was consistent across the board. You could pick almost any episode from seasons 3 through 8 at random, and it would be funnier, smarter, and more emotionally resonant than the best episode of most other shows. Entertainment Weekly gave the show a rating of A- in 1990 during its early seasons, then bumped it up to an A in 1993, and then an A+ in 1997 at the height of the Golden Age. Critics were literally running out of ways to praise it. And here's the thing that makes this whole era even more impressive. The Simpsons was doing all of this as a half-hour animated comedy. 22 minutes per episode. That's it. In those 22 minutes, the writers would pack in an A plot, a B plot, dozens of visual gags hidden in the background, callback jokes, cultural references, emotional moments, and enough quotable lines to fill an entire internet's worth of memes. The density of comedy in a Golden Age Simpsons episode is something that no other show has ever matched. You could watch the same episode 10 times and still catch something new. A sign in the background, a quick visual in a crowd scene, a throwaway line from a side character that you didn't notice before. The writers put jokes everywhere, at every level, because they could, and because they wanted to reward people who were paying close attention. The critical consensus on this era has been remarkably stable over the decades. Even now, more than 25 years after the Golden Age ended, critics and fans still talk about it with a sense of awe. One critic wrote that during seasons 3 through 8, the show was not just the funniest thing on television, but was fundamentally redefining comedy in a way that arguably has not been seen before or since. Another noted that the golden era of The Simpsons is widely considered to be among the most influential media ever produced. And perhaps the most telling praise came from critics who noted that even the weaker seasons of The Simpsons that followed the Golden Age are still superior to most other shows at their best. That's the standard that those 6 seasons set, so impossibly high that even the show itself has struggled to reach it ever again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The golden age of The Simpsons didn't just produce great episodes, though. It produced something even more valuable. It produced a world. A town called Springfield that was so richly detailed, so full of memorable faces and voices and stories, that it felt more real than most real places on television. And the characters who lived in that town, the ones who weren't named Simpson, might be the biggest reason the show earned the title of greatest ever. Section 4. Springfield, the greatest supporting cast in television history. Most television shows have a handful of characters that people care about. You've got your main family or your main group, and then a few side characters who pop in and out when the story needs them. That's how most shows work. But The Simpsons didn't do things the way most shows did. Instead of building a small world around one family, it built an entire town, a living, breathing, fully realized community of hundreds of characters, each with their own personality, their own quirks, their own catchphrases, and their own stories to tell. And that town, Springfield, is one of the biggest reasons why The Simpsons became the greatest show ever made. Think about it for a second. When you think of The Simpsons, you obviously think of Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. They're the core of the show. But then start listing the other characters and see how long it takes before you run out of names. Mr. Burns, the ancient, impossibly wealthy owner of the nuclear power plant. His loyal assistant, Waylon Smithers. Ned Flanders, the overly cheerful religious neighbor who drives Homer crazy with his niceness. Moe Sislak, the grumpy bartender who runs Moe's Tavern. Chief Wiggum, the hopelessly incompetent police chief. Principal Skinner, the uptight school principal who still lives with his mother. Krusty the Clown, the depressed, chain-smoking children's entertainer. Sideshow Bob, the intellectual criminal with a deep hatred for Bart Simpson. Barney Gumble, Homer's beer-loving best friend. Milhouse Van Houten, Bart's long-suffering best friend. Ralph Wiggum, the lovably clueless son of Chief Wiggum. Comic Book Guy, the sarcastic shop owner. Groundskeeper Willie, the angry Scottish janitor. Reverend Lovejoy, the bored, unenthusiastic pastor. Apu Nahasapima Petalon, the hard-working Quickie Mart clerk. Professor Frink, the eccentric inventor. Dr. Nick Riviera, the dangerously unqualified doctor. Snake Jailbird, the career criminal. Superintendent Chalmers, Skinner's perpetually frustrated boss. Otto Mann, the heavy metal-loving school bus driver. Hans Moleman, the unluckiest man alive. Nelson Muntz, the school bully with the famous quote, 38, and that's not even close to all of them. What made these characters so special wasn't just that there were a lot of them. It was that each one felt like a real person, or at least as real as a bright yellow cartoon character can feel. They had backgrounds, motivations, and personality traits that went deeper than their surface-level jokes. Mr. Burns wasn't just a villain. He was a man so old and so isolated by his wealth that he had completely lost touch with how normal people live. And that disconnect was both hilarious and oddly sad. Ned Flanders wasn't just the annoying religious neighbor. He was a genuinely kind man, trying his best in a world that kept punishing him for it, especially after the show eventually took his wife away in one of its most emotional storylines. Moe wasn't just a mean bartender. He was a deeply lonely person who craved connection and kept getting rejected, and the show found both comedy and heartbreak in that loneliness. The depth of these characters is what made them stick with people for decades. One of the most remarkable things about how Springfield was built is that the vast majority of these characters were brought to life by just a tiny handful of voice actors. The main cast of The Simpsons consists of 6 people: Dan Castellaneta, Julie Kavner, Nancy Cartwright, Yardley Smith, Hank Azaria, and Harry Shearer. That's it. 6 actors, voicing what eventually became hundreds of distinct characters. And the range that these performers brought to the show is genuinely staggering. Dan Castellaneta is probably the most well-known of the group because he voices Homer Simpson. But Homer is just the beginning. Castellaneta also voices Grandpa Simpson, Krusty the Clown, Barney Gumble, Groundskeeper Willie, Mayor Quimby, and dozens of other characters. Each of those voices is completely different from the others. Krusty doesn't sound anything like Homer. Willie doesn't sound anything like Grandpa. Yet they all come from the same person. When Castellaneta first started voicing Homer, he based the voice loosely on the actor Walter Matthau, but had trouble hitting certain emotional notes, so he adjusted the voice slightly at the beginning of the second season, and that adjusted version became the Homer we all know today. Matt Groening once said that he refuses to sit in on Castellaneta's recording sessions because he finds the actor so funny that he can't stop himself from laughing and ruining takes. There's also a famous bit of trivia about the episode Homer Goes to College, where Homer chants, "I am so smart," and spells it out as SMRT instead of SMART. According to the show's producers, that was a genuine mistake by Castellaneta during the recording, not a scripted joke. But it was exactly the kind of mistake Homer would make, so they kept it in. Julie Kavner voices Marge Simpson, and she also voices Marge's sisters Patty and Selma, as well as their mother. She gives each of them a slightly different version of that distinctive gravelly voice, making them sound related, but still their own people. Nancy Cartwright voices Bart Simpson, and when you find out that Bart is voiced by a woman, it changes how you hear him forever. Cartwright also voices Nelson Muntz, Ralph Wiggum, Todd Flanders, and several other kid characters on the show. She originally auditioned for the role of Lisa, but found the character didn't have much personality at that early stage, so she asked to try out for Bart instead. Matt Groening heard her read and gave her the part immediately. Yardley Smith voices Lisa Simpson, and unlike most of the other actors on the show, Lisa is the only character she voices regularly. But her performance is so consistent and so emotionally grounded that Lisa has become one of the most beloved characters in the entire series. Then there's Harry Shearer, who might have the most impressive range of any voice actor on the show. Shearer voices Mr. Burns, Smithers, Ned Flanders, Principal Skinner, Reverend Lovejoy, Lenny Leonard, Otto Mann, and many more. Think about how different Mr. Burns sounds from Ned Flanders. One is a frail, menacing old man who speaks in slow, calculated tones. The other is an upbeat, cheerful neighbor whose voice is warm and friendly. The same person does both of those voices and dozens of others on top of that. Shearer was invited to join the cast because Groening and Sam Simon were fans of his radio show, and he has been a cornerstone of the show ever since. And then there's Hank Azaria, whose list of characters could fill an entire page on its own. Azaria voices Mo Sislak, Chief Wiggum, Comic Book Guy, Professor Frink, Snake Jailbird, Dr. Nick Riviera, Superintendent Chalmers, and many, many more. He joined the show when the casting director, who knew him from a failed pilot, called him in to re-record the voice of Mo, which had originally been performed by a different actor. Azaria based his version of Mo on Al Pacino's voice in the film Dog Day Afternoon, then made it more rough and gravelly at the direction of Groening and Sam Simon. They liked it so much that they brought him back to do Chief Wiggum, then Apu, and before long he was a permanent member of the cast. Azaria won 4 Emmy Awards for his voice work on The Simpsons, more than any other individual cast member. Every single one of the 6 main cast members has won at least 1 Emmy Award for outstanding voiceover performance. Castellaneta and Azaria have each won 4. That level of recognition across an entire cast is almost unheard of, and it speaks to just how high the standard of performance was on this show. But the regular cast was only part of the equation. The Simpsons also became famous for its guest stars. Over the course of its run, the show has featured more celebrity guest appearances than any other scripted television series in history. It holds a Guinness World Record for this, with over 700 guest stars and counting. Actors, musicians, athletes, politicians, scientists, and public figures from every walk of life have lent their voices to the show. Some played themselves, some played original characters, and in many cases, the guest appearances became some of the most memorable moments in the entire series. No guest star left a bigger mark on The Simpsons than Phil Hartman. Before his tragic death in 1998, Hartman appeared in 52 episodes of the show and voiced 18 different characters. But he is best remembered for 2 in particular, Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. Troy McClure was a washed-up Hollywood actor who spent his days hosting cheap infomercials and appearing in low-budget educational films. His trademark was introducing himself with a line that always started the same way. "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as..." followed by the most ridiculous fake movie titles the writers could come up with. It was a simple joke, but Hartman's delivery made it one of the funniest running gags in the entire series. IGN ranked Troy McClure as the #1 peripheral character in the history of The Simpsons. His biggest episode was, quote, 44 in Season 7, where he marries Marge's sister Selma to save his failing career. Entertainment Weekly placed that episode 8th on their list of the top 25 Simpsons episodes of all time. Lionel Hutz was Springfield's most incompetent lawyer, an ambulance chaser with no real legal skills who the Simpson family kept hiring anyway, probably because he was the only lawyer they could afford. Hutz was the kind of character who would offer clients a free, quote, 45 doll to win their business, whose office was named __quote _46 __, and who once left a courtroom mid-trial to call his sponsor because he couldn't resist a bottle of bourbon. Hartman brought both of these characters to life with a voice and energy that nobody else could replicate. Matt Groening said he took Hartman for granted because he nailed the joke every time, and that Hartman could pull the maximum amount of humor out of any line he was given. Hartman first appeared on the show in the Season 2 episode Bart Gets Hit by a Car as Lionel Hutz. It was originally meant to be a one-time thing, but Hartman loved working on The Simpsons so much, and the staff loved working with him so much, that they kept writing parts for him. He also voiced one-off characters like Lyle Lanley, the con artist who sold Springfield a monorail in that famous Conan O'Brien episode. When Hartman was murdered in May of 1998, it hit The Simpsons cast and crew incredibly hard. He was the first member of their close-knit group to pass away. The producers made the decision not to recast Troy McClure or Lionel Hutz with different actors. Instead, they retired both characters out of respect for Hartman. The last episode to feature Troy McClure speaking was the Season 10 episode __quote _50 _, which was dedicated to Hartman's memory. Lionel Hutz's last speaking appearance was the Season 9 episode __quote _51 _. Both characters have occasionally appeared in the background of later episodes, but never with dialogue. One writer noted that The Simpsons' golden age is hard to imagine without Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, and that together they represent the most significant contribution to the show outside of its permanent cast. Their absence has been felt ever since. When Matt Groening later created his next show, Futurama, he named the main character Philip J. Fry in honor of Phil Hartman. Groening had also originally created the character of Zap Brannigan specifically for Hartman to voice, but after Hartman's death, the role went to someone else. It's a small detail, but it tells you everything about how much Hartman meant to the people who made The Simpsons. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The combination of the 6 main voice actors, the incredible depth of the supporting characters they created, and the legendary guest stars who passed through Springfield over the years is what turned a small fictional town into one of the most fully realized worlds in all of entertainment. Springfield doesn't feel like a backdrop. It feels like a real place, full of real people, each with their own story. And that world was built on top of a comedy structure that was unlike anything television had seen before. 3 distinct layers of humor, all working at the same time, all designed to make sure that no matter who you were or how old you were, there was something in every episode that was made just for you. Section 5. 3 layers of comedy. How The Simpsons was built for everyone. Now, a lot of shows are funny. A lot of shows can make you laugh. But very few shows in the history of television have been able to make a 6-year-old laugh, a 16-year-old laugh, and a 60-year-old laugh all at the same time, all at the same joke, and all for completely different reasons. The Simpsons did that. It did it consistently, week after week, for years. And the way it pulled this off was through a comedy structure that was completely unique at the time. The writers built every single episode with 3 distinct layers of humor stacked on top of each other, and each layer was designed to connect with a different type of viewer. This is one of the biggest reasons why The Simpsons became the greatest show ever made. It wasn't just funny, it was funny for everyone. The first layer was the most obvious one, the surface level. This was the slapstick, the physical comedy, the visual gags, and the big loud moments that anyone could understand, regardless of age, education, or even what language they spoke. Homer getting hurt, Bart pulling pranks, characters falling down, crashing into things, or reacting in exaggerated ways. This is the layer that kids latched onto immediately. You didn't need to know anything about politics or history or pop culture to laugh at Homer Simpson accidentally setting himself on fire while trying to light a barbecue. You didn't need any context to find it hilarious when Sideshow Bob stepped on rake after rake after rake in Cape Fear, getting smacked in the face every single time. That scene, by the way, is one of the most famous visual gags in the entire series. It goes on for what feels like forever, and by all logic, it should stop being funny at some point, but it just keeps getting funnier with every single rake. It's the kind of joke that a 5-year-old and a 50-year-old will both lose it over. This surface layer also included the running visual gags that became traditions of the show. Every episode of The Simpsons opens with 2 of them. First, there's the chalkboard gag, where you see Bart in detention at Springfield Elementary writing lines on the chalkboard as punishment. The sentence changes every episode, and over the years they've included things like quote 55, quote 56, and quote 57, quote. These are quick, silly, and completely accessible. You read them, you laugh, and the show moves on. Then there's the couch gag, where the entire family runs to sit on their couch in the living room, but something different happens every time. Sometimes the family shows up as zombies. Sometimes the couch falls through the floor. Sometimes the entire sequence turns into an elaborate production involving dozens of characters. Over the decades, the couch gag became a beloved institution of its own, with some later episodes turning it into full short films that ran for minutes before the actual episode even started. But underneath that surface layer of slapstick and visual comedy, there was a second, deeper layer. This was the one that rewarded older viewers, the ones who were paying closer attention and who brought a wider knowledge of the world with them when they sat down to watch. This layer was packed with references to movies, books, history, politics, music, art, and just about every other corner of culture you can think of. And the show didn't slow down to explain any of them. They flew by at high speed, buried inside dialogue, tucked into background details, or woven into storylines in ways that you either caught or you didn't. Cape Fear itself is a perfect example. On the surface, it's a funny episode about Sideshow Bob chasing Bart, but the entire episode is built as a spoof of the thriller film Cape Fear. The title is a play on the movie's name. The plot mirrors it. Specific shots and scenes reference it directly. If you've never seen Cape Fear, you still enjoy the episode because the comedy works on its own. But if you have seen it, or if you know the film even a little, the episode becomes twice as funny because you catch all the ways the writers are playing with and making fun of the original. That's the second layer at work. It doesn't replace the first layer, it sits on top of it, adding extra enjoyment for the viewers who can pick up on it. The show did this constantly. __quote _59 _ is built around a stage adaptation of Tennessee Williams' famous play A Streetcar Named Desire. Rosebud from Season 5 takes its title and several plot points from the classic film Citizen Kane. Homer's enemy plays with ideas about the American dream that would feel familiar to anyone who has ever read a book about class and success in America. The Treehouse of Horror Halloween specials were filled with parodies of everything from The Shining to The Twilight Zone to Edgar Allan Poe. Each of these references added richness and depth to episodes that were already funny without them. But for the viewers who caught them, they turned a great episode into something truly special. And this second layer wasn't limited to big, obvious references. The show was also loaded with small, quick jokes aimed at people with specific knowledge. There were math jokes hidden in background shots. There were jokes that only made sense if you knew Latin, or if you recognized a particular painting, or if you were familiar with a certain piece of classical music. The writer's room was full of incredibly well-educated people, many of whom had studied at places like Harvard, and they couldn't resist slipping in humor that reflected their own interests and knowledge. The amazing thing is that none of this ever made the show feel snobby or exclusive. If you didn't catch a reference to a 19th century novel hidden on a bookshelf in the background, it didn't matter. The episode still worked perfectly. You just got a little bonus if you happen to notice it. This brings us to one of the most famous aspects of The Simpsons comedy, the freeze frame gags. These are jokes that are hidden in the background of scenes, written on signs, printed on newspapers, displayed on storefronts, or tucked into tiny details that flash by so quickly you would never catch them in real time. To actually read them and appreciate them, you had to pause your television. The show became one of the first programs of the VCR era to take full advantage of this. The writers knew that people could now rewind and freeze their tapes, and they loaded every episode with hidden jokes that rewarded viewers who took the time to look. Signs on buildings in Springfield often had hilarious fake names. Newspapers held by characters in the background contained joke headlines. Books on shelves had funny titles. Menus, posters, letters, gravestones, license plates, and just about any surface that could hold text became an opportunity for the writers to slip in an extra laugh. One fan described the experience perfectly, saying they never watched The Simpsons live because they would miss too many great gags in the background signs if they couldn't hit rewind and pause. The show was so densely packed with these hidden jokes that entire websites and social media accounts have been dedicated to cataloging them. And even after decades of fans combing through every frame, new ones are still being discovered. When Disney Plus first launched and began streaming The Simpsons, they converted all the older episodes from their original screen format to a wider one. This ended up cropping the edges of the picture, and fans quickly realized that some of their favorite freeze-frame gags were being cut off. Background signs were missing. Edge-of-screen visual jokes were gone. In the Season 4 episode, New Kid on the Block, for example, the wider format cut out the name of the moving company helping the new neighbors, Clumsy Student Movers, and completely removed a visual gag of an employee tripping and breaking a lamp. In the Season 8 episode, You Only Move Twice, the cropping hid the fact that Homer and his boss Hank Scorpio step off a treadmill directly onto a moving sidewalk. The outcry from fans was loud enough that the issue was eventually addressed. Because for Simpsons viewers, those hidden details weren't optional extras. They were part of what made the show great. But perhaps the most extraordinary example of the show's layered approach to comedy is something that most viewers didn't even discover until years after it aired. Scattered across seasons 2, 3, and 4 of The Simpsons, there are brief clips of a fictional action movie called McBain, starring a character named Rainier Wolfcastle, who is a clear parody of Arnold Schwarzenegger. These clips show up in different episodes, usually playing on a television in the background, while the Simpson family goes about their lives. On their own, each clip is just a quick, funny parody of cheesy action movies. McBain punches his boss through a window. His partner gets killed 2 days before retirement. He sneaks into a villain's party disguised as an ice sculpture and says, "Ice to meet you," before shooting everyone. But here is the incredible part. If you take all of those clips and watch them in order, from the first one in the Season 2 episode, The Way We Was, all the way through to the last one in the Season 4 episode, Last Exit to Springfield, they form a complete, coherent mini-movie with an actual beginning, middle, and end. McBain discovers that a senator named Mendoza is running a drug operation. His partner gets killed. He goes rogue. He crashes Mendoza's party but gets drugged, and in the final clip, he storms Mendoza's building and throws him out of a window. It's a full story told across multiple seasons, hidden inside episodes that had nothing to do with McBain. Executive producer Al Jean later explained that the idea was originally pitched by Sam Simon, Mike Reiss, and himself, and that after the first clip got a positive response, they kept coming back to it, each time making fun of a different type of scene from the action movies that were popular at the time. Most fans didn't even realize this hidden movie existed until someone on the internet assembled all the clips together over a decade after they originally aired. When the compilation went viral on social media in 2024, millions of people were shocked. Comments poured in from longtime fans saying they had watched these episodes dozens of times and never once connected the McBain clips into a single story. That's the level of detail the writers put into this show. They hid an entire movie inside their own show, spread across 3 seasons, and most of the audience didn't figure it out for over 20 years. And then there was the third layer, the emotional one. This is the layer that separates The Simpsons from every other comedy that has ever tried to copy its formula. Underneath all the slapstick, all the references, all the hidden gags and background jokes, the show was about a family. A real family, with real problems, real love, and real struggles. Homer wasn't just a bumbling idiot who existed to get hurt and say stupid things. He was a father who desperately wanted to be good enough for his kids, but kept falling short. Marge wasn't just the voice of reason who rolled her eyes at Homer's mistakes. She was a woman who had given up her own dreams and ambitions to hold her family together, and sometimes the weight of that sacrifice showed. Bart wasn't just a troublemaker. He was a kid who acted out because he didn't know how else to get attention, and deep down he was terrified of disappointing the people he loved. And Lisa wasn't just the smart one. She was an 8-year-old girl trying to navigate a world that constantly made her feel like she didn't belong. Too smart for her family, too young for her ideas, and too different for her classmates. The show could make you cry just as easily as it could make you laugh. Homer sitting alone under the stars after a fight with Marge. Lisa struggling with loneliness and depression in quote _68 __. Homer watching a slideshow of baby Maggie's photos at work with a small plaque on his desk that reads, "Do it for her." These moments weren't accidents or afterthoughts. They were built into the DNA of the show. The writers understood that comedy hits hardest when you actually care about the people involved, and they made sure you cared about The Simpsons. Quote _70 _. This 3-layer structure, the slapstick on the surface, the intelligence in the middle, and the heart at the core, is what made The Simpsons something that no other show has been able to replicate. Plenty of shows have tried. Some of them have gotten close in one area or another. But nobody has ever managed to do all three at the same level, at the same time, for as long as The Simpsons did. And all of this brilliance, all of this comedy and emotion and hidden genius, played out on a network that might not have even survived without it. Because The Simpsons didn't just change comedy. It saved an entire television network from disappearing. Section 6. How The Simpsons single-handedly saved the Fox network. We've talked about the writing, the characters, the layers of comedy, but now we need to talk about something that most people don't fully appreciate when they think about The Simpsons. This show didn't just change television, it literally saved a television network. And not just any network, it saved the one it was on. Without The Simpsons, there is a very real chance that the Fox network as we know it today would not exist. That sounds like an exaggeration, but when you look at the facts, it's hard to come to any other conclusion. To understand why The Simpsons mattered so much to Fox, you need to understand what Fox was in the late 1980s. For decades, American television had been dominated by 3 networks: NBC, CBS, and ABC. Those were the big 3. They had all the money, all the stars, all the best time slots, and all the viewers. If you wanted to watch something on television in America, chances are you were watching one of those 3 networks. Then, in 1986, a man named Rupert Murdoch launched the Fox Broadcasting Company as the 4th network. And right from the start, Fox was the underdog. It didn't have the history, the trust, the infrastructure, or the audience that the other 3 had spent decades building. It was the new kid trying to sit at a table where everyone else had been eating for years. Fox needed a hit. It needed something that would put it on the map and prove to audiences, advertisers, and the rest of the industry that it was a real player. And that's exactly what it got when a yellow cartoon family showed up on December 17, 1989. The Simpsons became the first Fox series to rank among a season's top 30 highest-rated shows. Think about what that means. Fox had been around for a few years at that point, airing various shows, trying to build an audience, and none of them had cracked the top 30 until The Simpsons came along. This wasn't just a good show for Fox. It was the first real proof that the network could compete with the big 3. A media professor from Virginia Tech later described The Simpsons as the single most important program in establishing Fox as a legitimate broadcast television network. That's not a casual statement. That's an expert on media and television history saying that without this one animated show, Fox might never have been taken seriously. And then came Bart Mania. There is no other word for what happened in 1990. It was absolute madness. Bart Simpson went from being a character on a cartoon to being one of the most famous faces in the entire country almost overnight. Millions of Bart Simpson t-shirts were sold across the United States. Not thousands, millions. On some of the biggest days, as many as 1 million t-shirts were sold in a single day. Let that sink in. 1 million shirts with a cartoon 10-year-old's face on them flying off shelves and out of stores in a single 24-hour period. The shirts had his catchphrases on them. Quote 71, quote 72, quote 73, quote 74. You couldn't walk down a street, go to a school, visit a mall, or turn on a television without seeing Bart Simpson somewhere. The merchandise wasn't limited to t-shirts. There were Bart Simpson posters, buttons, keychains, magnets, bracelets, towels, bed sheets, dolls, action figures, and just about anything else you could possibly put a face on. By the fall of 1990, there were entire shops that sold nothing but Simpsons merchandise. Vending machines were stocked with Simpsons items, and the numbers were staggering. In the first 14 months of sales, Simpsons merchandise generated $2 billion in revenue. $2 billion in just over a year, for a cartoon that had barely been on the air. This wasn't just a successful product line. This was a cultural explosion that turned a cartoon family into one of the biggest commercial forces in American entertainment. Bart's popularity was so extreme that it created a massive black market for unofficial merchandise. People were printing their own bootleg Bart Simpson shirts and selling them at flea markets and on street corners. Some of the most popular bootleg designs featured quote 75 versions of Bart, redesigned to look like African American icons, wearing clothes associated with popular athletes like Michael Jordan and Bo Jackson, or sporting rap-inspired designs. These bootleg shirts became cultural items in their own right and are still remembered and collected to this day. Entertainment Weekly named Bart Simpson the Entertainer of the Year for 1990, writing that he had proven himself to be a rebel who was also a good kid, a terror who was easily terrified, and a character who surprised everyone with displays of real courage. The media described him as television's king of 1990 and television's brightest new star. In the 1990 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, one of the biggest annual events in American culture, Bart made his debut as one of the giant helium-filled balloons that the parade is famous for. A cartoon character that had existed for less than a year was already being floated above the streets of New York City alongside icons like Snoopy and Mickey Mouse. The show itself even made fun of this in the episode Bart vs. Thanksgiving, which aired the same day as the parade. In the episode, Homer tells Bart that if you start building a balloon for every flash-in-the-pan cartoon character, you turn the parade into a joke. And behind Homer, briefly visible on the television, is the real Bart Simpson balloon from the real parade. Then came the music. The Simpsons Sing the Blues was released in late 1990 and became a massive hit, peaking at number 3 on the Billboard 200 chart and eventually being certified double platinum, meaning it sold over 2 million copies. The lead single was a song called Do the Bartman, performed by Nancy Cartwright in character as Bart. The song was written by Michael Jackson, although he did not receive credit for it at the time. While Do the Bartman was never officially released as a single in the United States, it was enormous overseas. In the United Kingdom, it hit number 1 and stayed there for 3 weeks, and it ended up as the 7th best-selling song of the entire year in Britain. A cartoon character, from a show that had been on the air for barely a year, had a number 1 hit in one of the biggest music markets in the world. That was the level of cultural dominance The Simpsons had achieved. Not everyone was happy about it. Bart's rebellious attitude and his pride in being an underachiever made a lot of adults uncomfortable. Several American public schools banned students from wearing Bart Simpson t-shirts, particularly the ones with slogans like, quote, 79, quote, and, quote, 80, quote. School administrators believed Bart was a bad role model who was encouraging kids to disrespect authority, slack off in school, and take pride in failure. The controversy reached all the way to the White House. President George H.W. Bush publicly took aim at the show, declaring that American families needed to be underscore underscore quote underscore 81 underscore underscore. He was comparing the show to The Waltons, a wholesome 1970s drama about a tight-knit, respectable American family. Bush wanted America's children watching shows about good values and hard work, not a cartoon about a kid who wrote rude things on chalkboards and told adults to eat his shorts. The Simpsons writers, of course, responded the way they always did. They put it in the show. In one episode, the Simpson family is watching Bush's speech on television. Bart looks at the screen and says, quote, "It was a perfect comeback, quick, clever, and aimed right back at the most powerful man in the country, and Fox couldn't do a thing to stop them, because of that clause that James L. Brooks had negotiated into the original contract, the one that said Fox had no right to interfere with the show's content. That creative freedom meant the writers could mock anyone and anything they wanted, including the network that paid their salaries. And mock Fox they did. The Simpsons became famous for biting the hand that fed it. The show made fun of the Fox network constantly. It mocked Fox's programming. It mocked Fox's reputation. It joked about the network's low standards and its willingness to air anything for ratings. Rupert Murdoch, the man who owned Fox, actually appeared as a guest star in 2 episodes of the show, playing himself, and the writers still didn't hold back from making him the butt of jokes. Most networks would never allow a show to publicly embarrass them on their own air, but Fox had no choice. The contract protected the writers, and honestly, Fox needed The Simpsons far more than The Simpsons needed Fox. In 1998, Time magazine put Bart Simpson on their list of the 100 most influential people of the 20th century, ranking him at number 46. He was the only fictional character on the entire list. Not Homer, not Mickey Mouse, not Bugs Bunny, Bart Simpson. A 10-year-old cartoon troublemaker from a show that started as a series of sketches on a variety program nobody remembers was ranked alongside real-world leaders, scientists, artists, and revolutionaries as one of the most influential figures of the last 100 years. He had previously appeared on the cover of Time magazine's December 31st, 1990 issue, capping off the year in which he had become the biggest character in popular culture. The financial relationship between Fox and The Simpsons extended far beyond advertising revenue and merchandise. When Tracey Ullman, the host of the variety show where The Simpsons originally appeared as shorts, saw how successful the standalone series had become, she filed a lawsuit against Fox in 1992. She claimed that since The Simpsons had originated on her show, she deserved a share of the profits. The courts rejected her claim, but the fact that the lawsuit happened at all tells you something about how much money The Simpsons was generating. It was enough money that people who had been loosely connected to the show's origins thought they deserved a piece of it. Fox recognized the value of what they had and eventually made sure to keep the show's stars happy, at least financially. The 6 main voice actors went through several rounds of salary negotiations over the years. In the early days, they were paid around $30,000 per episode. By 1998, that had risen to $125,000. In 2004, the actors intentionally skipped several recording sessions and demanded $360,000 per episode. That dispute was resolved, and their salaries were bumped up to $250,000 per episode. By 2008, another negotiation brought their pay to $400,000 per episode. In 2011, as the show's ratings were declining, the main cast agreed to a pay cut to $300,000 per episode to help keep the show financially viable. The fact that the voice actors of an animated show were negotiating salaries in the hundreds of thousands per episode was itself a sign of how important and how profitable The Simpsons was to the network. The show's influence on Fox went beyond just ratings and revenue. It changed how the network was perceived. Before The Simpsons, Fox was seen as a scrappy upstart that couldn't compete with the established networks. After The Simpsons, Fox was seen as a home for bold, original, boundary-pushing programming. The show's success gave Fox the confidence and the credibility to take risks on other shows that might not have been given a chance anywhere else. The entire landscape of Fox's programming, from its comedies to its dramas to its reality shows, was built on a foundation that The Simpsons helped create. The show proved that audiences were hungry for something different, something that didn't follow the old rules, and Fox leaned into that identity for decades. And here is perhaps the most fitting detail of all. In 1999, an episode of The Simpsons called "When You Dish Upon a Star" featured a quick background gag. A sign was shown for 20th Century Fox with a small line underneath it that read, "A division of Walt Disney Company." It was a throwaway joke, a quick laugh about the idea that Disney might one day buy Fox. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Then, in 2017, Disney announced that it was indeed acquiring 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets in a deal worth over $71 billion. The deal was finalized, and suddenly, The Simpsons, the show that had built Fox from the ground up, belonged to Disney. The show that had spent decades mocking Fox was now owned by the House of Mickey Mouse. Even in its relationship with the network it saved, The Simpsons managed to do something nobody saw coming. __quote_85__. The fact that The Simpsons saved Fox, turned it into a major network, generated billions of dollars, and then eventually ended up being part of the deal that handed Fox's entertainment empire to Disney is the kind of story that would be too ridiculous if it happened in a fictional show. But it happened in real life. And throughout all of it, the show kept winning. It kept producing episodes. And it kept collecting awards at a rate that no animated series has ever come close to matching. Which brings us to what might be the most impressive collection of trophies in television history. Section 7. The most decorated animated series in award history. When you talk about the greatest anything, whether it's the greatest athlete, the greatest song, or the greatest movie, people will always disagree. Greatness is one of those things that everyone has a different opinion on. But awards are different. Awards are counted. Awards are on the record. And when it comes to awards, The Simpsons doesn't just have more than any other animated show. It has so many more that the gap between The Simpsons and everything else isn't even close. The numbers are so far apart that calling it a competition almost feels unfair. This is the most decorated animated series in television history, and it might stay that way forever. Let's start with the biggest award in American television, the Emmy. If you've ever watched an award show on TV, you've probably seen the Emmys. They are the highest honor you can receive for working in television, and winning one is a career-defining achievement for most people. Some shows are considered successful if they win 2 or 3 over their entire run. A show that wins 5 or 6 is considered exceptional. The Simpsons has won 37 Primetime Emmy Awards. 37. That is a number so large that it's hard to put into context. To understand how dominant that is, you need to look at what other animated shows have achieved. South Park, one of the most successful and long-running animated shows of the last 30 years, has won 5. Family Guy, another massive animated hit, has won a handful. The Simpsons has more than all of them combined and then some. The show holds the Guinness World Record for the most Emmy Awards won by an animated series. Nobody else is even in the same conversation. Of those 37 Emmys, 12 were won in the Outstanding Animated Program category. That's the award given specifically to the best animated show on television each year, and The Simpsons has won it 12 times. That means in 12 separate years, a panel of television industry voters looked at every animated show on the air and decided that The Simpsons was the best one. And that doesn't even count the other categories where the show took home trophies. The Simpsons has won Emmys for Outstanding Voiceover Performance, for Music and Lyrics, and in other categories. The show didn't just dominate one corner of the Emmys. It spread its wins across multiple categories because it was excellent in multiple areas at the same time. But here's a story that tells you something important about the relationship between The Simpsons and the Emmy Awards. Something that reveals a bias that existed in the television industry for years. In 1993, the rules were changed so that animated television shows could be submitted for the Outstanding Comedy Series category. That's the big one. That's the award that goes to the best comedy on all of television, not just the best animated show, but the best comedy period, competing against every live-action sitcom on every network. The producers of The Simpsons saw this as their chance. They submitted 2 episodes that they believed represented the show at its absolute peak. The episodes they chose were, quote, 86 and, quote, 87, both from the heart of the Golden Age. These are episodes that are still considered some of the finest comedy ever produced for television in any format. And The Simpsons did not receive a nomination. Not a win, not even a nomination. The Emmy voters simply weren't ready to accept that a cartoon could be as good as or better than a live-action show. Several critics at the time called it one of the biggest snubs in Emmy history, and it's hard to disagree with them. This was 1993. The Simpsons was arguably the funniest show on television. It was pulling in tens of millions of viewers. It was the subject of magazine covers and national conversations, and the Emmy voters couldn't bring themselves to put it in the same category as shows that had real people in them instead of drawings. The producers tried again the following year, submitting more episodes for Outstanding Comedy Series. Again, no nomination. After 2 years of being ignored, the producers gave up and went back to submitting episodes in the animation category, where they continued to dominate for decades. The Simpsons has never been nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series, not because it wasn't good enough, but because the industry had a blind spot when it came to animation. They couldn't see past the fact that it was drawn. They couldn't accept that a cartoon could stand alongside the so-called serious comedies. It's one of the most frustrating facts in Emmy history, and it says far more about the Emmys than it does about The Simpsons. The show did eventually get recognized by the Golden Globes, another one of the biggest awards in entertainment. In 2002, The Simpsons was nominated for Best Television Series in the Musical or Comedy category at the Golden Globe Awards. It lost to Curb Your Enthusiasm. While it never won a Golden Globe, the fact that it was even nominated in a category alongside live-action comedies was a step forward from the Emmy snub nearly a decade earlier. It showed that at least some parts of the industry were starting to recognize that animation belonged at the table with everything else. Then there are the Annie Awards. The Annie Awards have been given out since 1972, and they are awarded specifically to animated programs. These are the Oscars of the animation world. The Simpsons has won 34 Annie Awards, including 12 straight wins in the Best Animated Television Production category. 12 in a row! That means for 12 consecutive years, the animation industry voted The Simpsons as the single best animated show on television. No other show has come close to that kind of streak. The Simpsons didn't just win occasionally or have a few good years. It won every single year for over a decade straight, which is the kind of dominance that almost never happens in any competitive field. But perhaps the most meaningful award The Simpsons has received isn't measured by numbers at all. In 1997, The Simpsons became the first animated series in history to win a Peabody Award. The Peabody Award is one of the most respected honors in all of media. It recognizes work that makes an outstanding contribution to electronic media. It's not about ratings or popularity. It's about quality, importance, and impact. And until The Simpsons won one, no animated series had ever been considered worthy. The Peabody Committee awarded the show for providing, in their words, exceptional animation and stinging social satire, both of which they said were in extremely short supply in television at the time. They praised the creative team by name, including Matt Groening, Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, James L. Brooks, and Sam Simon, as well as the 6 main voice actors. The fact that a cartoon was being honored alongside news programs, documentaries, and prestige dramas was a landmark moment for animation. The Simpsons proved that animated comedy could have the same artistic and cultural value as any other form of television. And then, in 2020, The Simpsons won a second Peabody Award. But this wasn't just a regular Peabody. This was the Peabody Institutional Award, a special honor that recognized the show's 3 decades of impact on television and culture. The Peabody Committee described the show as likely the most globally recognized television show in world history. They wrote that following a decade of earnest family sitcoms, The Simpsons cleared the way for a more satirical and deeply ironic mode of comedy. They praised the show for remaining funny, fresh, and insightful, while always trusting and respecting its audience's intelligence. An institutional Peabody is not something that gets handed out every year. It's reserved for programs or organizations that have made a lasting, permanent impact on the media landscape. The Simpsons receiving one was a recognition that the show hadn't just been good for a while, it had changed what television could be, permanently. The show has also won 13 Writers Guild of America awards, which are voted on by professional screenwriters and are considered one of the best measures of writing quality in the industry. The Simpsons dominated the animation category at the Writers Guild Awards for years, winning consistently between 2004 and 2015. This is significant because these awards are given by writers to other writers. These aren't popularity contests or fan votes. These are the best working writers in the entertainment industry looking at the scripts produced by The Simpsons and saying, yes, this is the best writing in animated television, year after year after year. Beyond individual awards, The Simpsons has collected 9 Environmental Media Awards for episodes that dealt with environmental themes. It has won 6 Genesis Awards, given by the Humane Society, for programs that bring attention to animal welfare issues. It has won 8 People's Choice Awards, which are voted on by the general public. It has won 3 British Comedy Awards. And in 2004, the British Comedy Awards gave Matt Groening a special award for outstanding contribution to comedy, recognizing his personal role in creating one of the most important comedies in the history of the medium. In 2000, the Simpson family received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Located at 7021 Hollywood Boulevard, the star was given not to the show itself, but to the characters. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie Simpson have their names permanently embedded in the sidewalk of one of the most famous streets in the world, right alongside the biggest real-life stars in entertainment history. A fictional cartoon family literally has the same honor as the greatest actors, musicians, and directors who ever lived. And it goes beyond television. In 2012, The Simpsons was nominated for an Academy Award. Not the show itself, but a theatrical short film called __quote _88 __, which featured Maggie Simpson in a standalone story. The fact that the Simpsons universe produced a piece of work good enough to earn an Oscar nomination tells you something about the range and quality of the creative team behind it. One person deserves special mention when it comes to the awards: James L. Brooks, the executive producer who helped develop The Simpsons from the very beginning, has won 22 Primetime Emmy Awards over his career. 12 of those 22 were for The Simpsons alone. That gives him the record for the most primetime Emmy Awards won by a single person in history. Think about that for a moment. The person who holds the record for winning the most Emmys ever got more than half of those trophies from one show, and that show is The Simpsons. If you wanted a single fact that sums up how dominant The Simpsons has been at the awards, that might be it. The show also holds 2 Guinness World Records, one for being the longest-running primetime animated television series, and the other for having the most guest stars of any scripted television show in history, with over 700 guest appearances. These aren't just records that the show set once and someone else is close to breaking. These are records that The Simpsons keeps extending every single year it stays on the air. The gap between The Simpsons and second place in both of those categories gets wider with every new season. Now, it's worth acknowledging that awards don't tell the whole story. Plenty of great shows have never won major awards, and plenty of average shows have won too many. But when one show dominates every single major award in its field for multiple decades, when it breaks records at the Emmys, sweeps the Annie Awards for over a decade straight, becomes the first animated show to win a Peabody, earns a second Peabody for its lasting institutional impact, racks up Writers Guild awards from the best professional writers in the business, gets an Oscar nomination, puts its characters on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and gives its executive producer the record for most Emmys ever won by a human being, that's not luck. That's not politics. That's not the system being nice to a popular show. That's greatness confirmed over and over again by every possible measure the industry has. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The awards tell us that The Simpsons wasn't just popular. It was recognized by experts, by critics, by professional writers, by the animation industry, by the general public, and by the most respected institutions in media as being the very best at what it did. And what it did was prove something that the entire entertainment industry had been wrong about for decades. It proved that animation wasn't a lesser form of storytelling. It wasn't a genre for children. It was a medium capable of producing the greatest comedy in television history. And proving that point didn't just change the awards landscape, it changed what was possible for every animated show that came after it. Section 8. How The Simpsons Proved Animation is a Medium, Not a Genre. For most of television history, there was one simple rule that everybody in the industry agreed on. Cartoons are for kids. That was it. That was the unwritten law. If something was animated, it was for children, and if it was for adults, it was live action. There were no exceptions. Nobody questioned it. Nobody even thought to question it. The entire entertainment industry just accepted this idea as a basic truth, the same way you'd accept that water is wet or the sky is blue. And then The Simpsons came along and proved that every single person who believed that rule was wrong. The Simpsons didn't just challenge the idea that animation was only for kids, it completely destroyed it. It blew the doors off, and in doing so, it created an entire world of adult animated television that simply would not exist today without it. To understand how big of a deal this was, you have to go back to the beginning. The very beginning. In 1960, a studio called Hanna-Barbera created a show called The Flintstones. It was the first animated series to air in primetime on a major American network. It ran on ABC and it was aimed at adults. The concept was simple. Take the basic setup of The Honeymooners, a popular live-action comedy about a working-class married couple, and set it in the Stone Age. Fred Flintstone was basically a caveman version of Ralph Cramden. The show had adult themes, adult humor, and was even sponsored by Winston cigarettes. During commercial breaks, Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble would sit around and talk about how good their cigarettes tasted. This was not a show for 5-year-olds. It was a comedy made for adults that happened to be drawn instead of filmed. The Flintstones ran for 6 seasons, from 1960 to 1966. It was a hit. It proved that animated shows could work in prime time and attract adult audiences. And then it ended. And what happened next is one of the strangest things in television history. After the Flintstones went off the air, networks completely abandoned the idea of animated shows in prime time. Just gave up on it for almost 3 decades. From 1966 to 1989, there was essentially nothing. No major network tried to put an animated comedy in prime time and make it work for adults. A few small attempts were made here and there, but nothing stuck. The only animated show to last more than 1 season during that entire stretch was a show called Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, which aired from 1972 to 1974, and that wasn't even on a major network. It ran in a different kind of broadcast called first-run syndication. For nearly a quarter of a century, the entertainment industry looked at the Flintstones and said, "That was nice, but cartoons still aren't really for grown-ups." Animation was pushed into Saturday mornings, where it was aimed at children and treated as disposable entertainment to sell cereal and toys. Then, on December 17, 1989, The Simpsons premiered, and everything changed. The Simpsons was the first animated show to air in prime time on a major American network in over 2 decades. And it came with a decision that might seem small, but was actually revolutionary. Matt Groening chose not to include a laugh track. Every animated sitcom before The Simpsons had used one. The Flintstones had one, the Jetsons had one. Every cartoon comedy that tried to appeal to older audiences had someone's recorded laughter playing over the jokes, telling the audience when they were supposed to find something funny. The Simpsons was the first American animated sitcom to drop the laugh track entirely and trust its audience to decide for themselves what was funny. That creative choice would go on to influence not just animated shows, but live-action comedies too. Shows like Malcolm in the Middle, The Office, and dozens of others would later follow that same path. But the bigger impact was what The Simpsons proved to the television industry as a whole. Before The Simpsons, Fox executives were genuinely worried about the show's format. They were afraid that adults would be turned off by the bright colors and the fact that it was a cartoon. They were also worried that children would be confused by the mature stories and the jokes about politics, religion, and social issues. It was a real concern inside the network. Could a cartoon actually work for both audiences at the same time? The Simpsons answered that question in the most dramatic way possible. Not only did it work for both audiences, it became the biggest show on the entire network. It proved that animation wasn't a limitation, it was a freedom. A cartoon could do things that live-action shows couldn't. It could put characters in any situation, any location, any time period. It could tell stories about space travel, time travel, musical numbers, apocalyptic disasters, and absurd fantasies, all without spending a single extra dollar on sets or special effects. Everything cost the same to draw. The only limit was imagination. The industry noticed, and slowly at first, then very quickly, a flood of animated shows made for adults began pouring onto American television. The Simpsons had been the only mainstream English-language adult animated sitcom for years. Then in 1993, MTV launched Beavis and Butthead, created by Mike Judge. It was crude, it was controversial, and it was aimed squarely at teenagers and young adults. It became one of MTV's most popular shows. In 1997, 2 things happened. Mike Judge created another animated show for Fox called King of the Hill, a quieter, more grounded comedy about a propane salesman and his family in small-town Texas. And on Comedy Central, Trey Parker and Matt Stone launched South Park, a show that took the edginess of The Simpsons and turned it up to a level that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. South Park was vulgar, offensive, politically charged, and absolutely fearless, and it became a massive hit. In 1999, Matt Groening himself launched a second animated show called Futurama, a science fiction comedy about a pizza delivery guy who gets frozen and wakes up in the year 3000. That same year, Fox debuted Family Guy, created by Seth MacFarlane. Family Guy wore its Simpsons influence on its sleeve. It centered on a family in a fictional American town, with a bumbling, overweight father, a more sensible wife, and a cast of eccentric kids and neighbors. The similarities were obvious, and The Simpsons even made fun of it. But Family Guy found its own voice through rapid-fire cutaway jokes and a willingness to be as outrageous as possible. Then came Adult Swim. In 2001, Cartoon Network launched a late-night programming block called Adult Swim, which was dedicated entirely to animated shows made for adults. Shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Robot Chicken, and dozens of others found a home there. Critics have directly credited The Simpsons with opening the door that made Adult Swim possible. If The Simpsons hadn't proven that adults would watch cartoons in massive numbers, a cable network would never have had the confidence to dedicate an entire block of programming to adult animation. Adult Swim went on to become one of the most successful brands in cable television, and it launched shows that would become cultural landmarks in their own right. The wave kept growing. American Dad arrived in 2005. Archer debuted in 2009 on FX, taking the spy genre and turning it into an animated comedy with sharp writing and layered references. Bob's Burgers premiered on Fox in 2011, focusing on a loving family running a burger restaurant, proving that animated comedies didn't need to be mean-spirited or shocking to be great. In 2013, Rick and Morty launched on Adult Swim and quickly became one of the most popular shows on cable television, blending science fiction with dark comedy and surprisingly deep emotional storytelling. Its co-creator, Justin Roiland, said his animation style was partially inspired by growing up watching The Simpsons. And in 2014, Netflix released BoJack Horseman, a show about a washed-up celebrity horse dealing with depression, addiction, and self-destruction. BoJack Horseman might be the clearest example of what The Simpsons made possible. Its creator, Raphael Bob Laxberg, listed The Simpsons as the #1 influence on his show, specifically praising its ability to tell sad stories without sacrificing humor. Bob Laxberg also said something that perfectly captures what The Simpsons proved decades earlier. He said that animation isn't a style, it's a format, and that saying you're a fan of animation is as silly as saying you're a fan of live action, because both can mean absolutely anything. That idea, that animation is a format capable of telling any kind of story, not a genre limited to one kind of story, is the core truth that The Simpsons established. A writer for Time magazine broke down exactly how the influence worked. He noted that Family Guy, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, and many other shows all feature some version of the same basic structure that The Simpsons popularized. A father who means well but keeps messing up, a wife who holds everything together, a group of kids who get into trouble, and a surrounding cast of colorful neighbors and townsfolk. Shows that didn't follow the family structure, like Robot Chicken, Archer, and others, still drew heavily from Matt Groening's style of humor, mixing rapid-fire cultural references with irreverence and physical comedy. Time described The Simpsons as the North Star of adult animation, the reference point that every show in the genre looks to, even if they chart their own course. Alex Hirsch, the creator of Gravity Falls, described adult animation in the most honest terms anyone has used. He called it an arms race of different ways to copy The Simpsons. Friends of his from animation school, including the creators of Adventure Time and Regular Show, were also directly inspired by The Simpsons. The show's influence wasn't just on comedies aimed at adults. It changed how animation in general was perceived, how seriously it was taken, and what stories people believed animation could tell. The Simpsons also changed the business side of animation in ways that matter. Before The Simpsons, voice actors on animated shows were paid relatively little. Animation was not considered prestigious work. The Simpsons changed that by proving that a single animated show could generate billions of dollars and hold a place on a network schedule for decades. It showed the industry that animation was not a cheap alternative to real television. It was real television, and the people who made it deserved to be compensated and respected accordingly. Today, the idea that animation is only for children sounds ridiculous. There are animated shows about depression, about political corruption, about addiction, about mortality, about the meaning of life. There are animated shows that make people cry as often as they make them laugh. There are animated shows that win major awards, attract A-list talent, and top streaming charts around the world. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, HBO, Apple, and every major streaming platform invests heavily in adult animation because it is one of the most reliable and profitable formats in entertainment. None of that exists without The Simpsons. Every single adult animated show that has ever aired on American television, from South Park to Family Guy to Rick and Morty to BoJack Horseman to Bob's Burgers to Archer to Big Mouth to everything on Adult Swim, exists because The Simpsons proved that a cartoon could be smart, could be funny, could be emotional, could be political, could be controversial, and could attract one of the biggest audiences on television. It didn't just open a door, it built the entire hallway. Every show that came after it walked through a space that The Simpsons created. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the influence didn't stop at what was on screen. The Simpsons changed the English language itself. It put words into the dictionary that didn't exist before. It created catchphrases that became part of everyday speech in countries around the world. It didn't just change how people watched television, it changed how people talked. And that might be the most impressive thing of all. Section 9. How The Simpsons rewrote the English language. Most television shows entertain you for half an hour and then you move on with your life. You might remember a funny scene or a great moment, but the show doesn't follow you out the door. It doesn't change the way you talk. It doesn't put new words into your mouth that you use every single day without even thinking about where they came from. The Simpsons did exactly that. It didn't just give people something to watch. It gave people new ways to speak. It invented words that ended up in real dictionaries. It created phrases that spread across entire countries and became part of how millions of people communicate. No other television show in history has had this kind of impact on the English language. One CEO of a translation company went as far as comparing Homer Simpson to William Shakespeare as a creator of new words. That might sound extreme, but when you look at how many Simpsons words and phrases have become part of everyday language around the world, it starts to make a lot of sense. The biggest example, and the one everybody knows, is a single sound. Dough! That one syllable, that one short burst of frustration, is probably the most famous catchphrase in the history of television. Homer Simpson says it whenever something goes wrong. Whenever he hurts himself, whenever he realizes he's made a mistake, whenever something bad is about to happen. It's a sound that captures a feeling every human being on the planet has experienced. That moment when you mess up and you know it, and all you can do is let out a noise that says everything words can't. The story of how Quote 91 was created is one of the best behind-the-scenes stories in the show's history. When Dan Castellaneta was first asked to voice Homer's reaction to things going wrong, the script simply read __quote _92 ___. That was it. No specific word, just a direction. Castellaneta decided to use a long, drawn-out Quote 93, inspired by a Scottish actor named Jimmy Finlayson, who had used a similar sound in old Laurel and Hardy movies from the 1920s and 1930s. Finlayson used the sound as a polite substitute for saying __quote _94 __. Matt Groening heard what Castellaneta was doing and told him to speed it up, make it shorter, make it punchier, so it would fit better with the fast timing of animation. Castellaneta shortened it to a quick, sharp __quote _95 __, and a piece of language history was born. Here's something most people don't know. In the actual Simpsons scripts, the word __quote _96 _ was never written out. Every single time Homer says it, the script reads __quote _97 __. That's how it appears on paper. The writers even used this in episode titles as a running joke, naming episodes things like EI and Simpsons Califragilisticexpialidocious. But outside the writer's room, the word took on a life of its own. People started saying it in conversation. Not just Simpsons fans, everyone. It spread so far and so fast that it stopped being a reference to the show and just became a word that people used naturally, the same way you'd say ouch when you stub your toe, or oops when you drop something. In 2001, the Oxford English Dictionary officially added dough to its pages. The Oxford English Dictionary is widely considered the most important record of the English language in the world. It has been tracking and defining English words for over a century, and in 2001, it decided that a sound invented by a voice actor on a cartoon show had become a real, permanent part of the English language. The definition reads, expressing frustration at the realization that things have turned out badly or not as planned, or that one has just said or done something foolish. The dictionary noted that the word was popularized by The Simpsons. It was also added to the Webster's Millennium Dictionary of English and the Macmillan Dictionary for Advanced Learners. In 2006, TV Land ranked __quote _103 _ as the 6th greatest television catchphrase of all time. A cartoon character's grunt, something that was never even spelled out in the scripts, became one of the most recognized words on the planet. But dough wasn't the only word The Simpsons gave to the world, not even close. The show was essentially running a language experiment on live television for decades, creating words and phrases that sounded made up, but were used with such confidence and in such perfect context that people just started adopting them without a second thought. In the Season 7 episode Quote 105, which aired on February 18, 1996, the show introduced 2 fake words in a single scene that would both eventually end up in real dictionaries. The episode features a film about Springfield's fictional founder, Jebediah Springfield, which includes the town motto, "A noble spirit embiggens the smallest man." The teacher, Mrs. Krabappel, turns to another teacher, Miss Hoover, and says she's never heard the word, quote, 107 before she moved to Springfield. Miss Hoover responds with one of the greatest throwaway lines in the show's history. I don't know why, it's a perfectly cromulent word. 2 made-up words in one scene, both delivered with total confidence, neither one acknowledged as being unusual by anyone other than the new teacher. The joke was that these fake words were treated as completely normal, and the genius of it was that both words actually felt real. Ambigens sounds like it could be a legitimate English word because the structure makes sense. The prefix "em" is used in real words like empower and embellish, and combining it with big to mean to make bigger or more powerful just works. Cromulent sounds like it means acceptable or fine, even though there's absolutely no reason it should. The writers who came up with these words had no idea what they were starting. Underscore underscore quote underscore 118 underscore underscore was created by Simpsons writer David X. Cohen, who would later go on to help create Futurama with Matt Groening. People started using both words in real conversation, then in writing, then online. And then, over 20 years after a cartoon teacher said them in a throwaway joke, both words were officially added to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Underscore underscore quote underscore 119 underscore underscore was added in 2018, defined as meaning to make bigger or more expansive. Merriam-Webster noted that the first usage of the word in its current meaning came from The Simpsons. Underscore underscore quote underscore 120 underscore underscore was added in 2023, defined as meaning acceptable or satisfactory. 27 years. That's how long it took for a joke word from a cartoon to become an officially recognized part of the English language. The Simpsons writers challenged themselves to insert two real-sounding fake words into a script, and both of them ended up in the dictionary. That is not something any other show has ever done. Then there's underscore underscore quote underscore 121 underscore underscore. That short, flat expression of total indifference that people use when they just don't care about something. While the exact origins of meh are debated, and it may have older roots in Yiddish, The Simpsons was credited with bringing the word into mainstream use. Simpsons writer John Swartzwelder is credited with first putting meh into a script. When asked about it, Swartzwelder said he heard it from an advertising writer who called it the funniest word in the world back in the early 1970s. Whatever its origins, it was The Simpsons that took it from something almost nobody used to something almost everybody used. The BBC named meh one of the 20 words that define the 2000s, a word that captures the exact feeling of not caring enough to even form a complete thought, and it was popularized by a cartoon. The show also gave the world entire phrases that escaped the television screen and entered real-life language. In the 1995 episode Round Springfield, budget cuts at Springfield Elementary forced the school's Scottish janitor, groundskeeper Willie, to teach French class. Expressing his feelings about the French, he declares, quote, "The line was most likely written by staff writer Ken Keeler, who later confirmed he coined the phrase and considers it his best contribution to the show. Executive producer Al Jean said the staff never expected the term to become widely used and never intended it as a genuine political statement, but widely used it became. The phrase took on a life far beyond the show. When tensions between the United States and France were high in the years before the Iraq War, the phrase was everywhere. The New York Post used underscore underscore quote underscore 127 underscore underscore as the front page headline of their December 7th, 2006 issue, referring to a political group recommending that American soldiers be withdrawn from Iraq. Newspapers like the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, and others used the phrase in serious political reporting. Television presenter Jeremy Clarkson used it on Top Gear. A journalist for the Times of London called it perhaps the most famous of all the phrases coined by The Simpsons, and said it had become a cliché in journalism. A throwaway joke from a cartoon janitor became a real phrase used in real political discussions and real newspaper headlines. That is the power The Simpsons had over language. And there are so many more. Comic Book Guy's worst episode ever became a template that people apply to everything. Worst day ever. Worst idea ever. That specific structure, with the periods between words for dramatic effect, came directly from The Simpsons and is used constantly in everyday conversation and online communication. Homer's quote 129 became the template for quote 130, a way of expressing desire for something delicious or satisfying. Kent Brockman's line, "I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords," became a phrase people use whenever any new authority figure appears, whether it's a new boss, a new president, or a new technology. Bart's "Eat My Shorts" became one of the defining phrases of the early 1990s, and his "Ay caramba" was heard on playgrounds around the world. Nelson's __quote _134 became the universal sound of pointing out someone else's misfortune. Ralph Wiggum contributed, "Me fail English? That's unpossible," which brought back an actual Old English word that hadn't been commonly used since the 1400s. Homer gave us, quote, 136. Ned Flanders gave us, quote, 137 and, quote, 138. Mr. Burns gave us, quote, 139, said while slowly tapping his fingertips together, turning a common English word into something that now carries an entirely different meaning when said in a certain tone. One of the most remarkable things about The Simpsons' language impact is that it crossed borders. The show has been dubbed into over a dozen languages, including French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, and Arabic. In the French version, Homer says "toe" instead of "dough," because the French voice actor misread the word during his first recording session and simply never corrected it. Some phrases, like cheese-eating surrender monkeys, created unique translation problems. In the French dub of that episode, the word surrender was quietly left out of the translation, for obvious reasons. Translators around the world have had to find ways to capture the spirit of Simpsons language in their own tongues, and the fact that so many phrases have survived the jump between languages tells you how deeply the show's words have embedded themselves in global culture. The Simpsons didn't just reflect how people talked, it changed how people talked. It added words to dictionaries that the most respected language authorities in the world had to acknowledge as legitimate parts of the English language. It created phrases that journalists, politicians, and ordinary people use without even thinking about where they came from. It turned a voice actor's improvised grunt into one of the most universally recognized words on the planet. No sitcom, no drama, no movie franchise, and no other animated show has ever had this kind of impact on language. The Simpsons literally rewrote the dictionary. And when a show can change not just what people watch, but what people say, it reaches a level of cultural influence that very few pieces of entertainment in human history have ever achieved. Quote _144 But the language was only one piece of the cultural puzzle. Because The Simpsons didn't just predict how people would talk, it predicted the future itself. And not once or twice, over and over and over again, in ways that still feel impossible to explain. Section 10. The show that predicted the future. There are a lot of shows that have made people laugh, a lot of shows that have made people think. But there is only one show in the history of television that makes people say over and over again, how did they know that was going to happen? The Simpsons has been called many things over its 30-plus years on the air. The greatest comedy ever made, the most influential animated show in history, the longest-running scripted series in American television. But there is one title that it holds above all others in the minds of millions of people on the internet, and that title is The Show That Predicts the Future. Because time and time again, jokes that the Simpsons writers came up with years or even decades ago have turned into real events. And while there are perfectly reasonable explanations for why this happens, the sheer number of times the show has gotten it right is one of the most fascinating things about it. The most famous prediction of all, the one that made headlines around the entire world, is the Trump presidency. On March 19, 2000, The Simpsons aired an episode called Bart to the Future. It was the 17th episode of Season 11, written by Dan Greaney and directed by Michael Marcantel. In the episode, Bart is shown a vision of his life 30 years in the future by the manager of a casino. In this vision, his sister Lisa has become the President of the United States. She is sitting in the Oval Office, and in a casual, throwaway line, she tells her staff, "As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump." Her aide, Secretary Milhouse Van Houten, then tells her that the country is broke. The joke was that Donald Trump becoming president represented, in Greaney's words, the logical last stop before hitting bottom. At the time, Trump had just launched a real presidential campaign. In 1999, he had announced his run for president as a candidate with the Reform Party, and the Simpsons writers were making fun of that. The episode was produced during that campaign, so the reference wasn't random. But nobody, including the writers, thought Trump would actually become president. It was a joke about an unlikely future. 16 years later, on November 8, 2016, Donald Trump was elected the 45th President of the United States. The internet exploded. Clips from Bart to the Future were shared millions of times across every social media platform. News organizations from Time Magazine to NPR to CBS News to The Hollywood Reporter ran stories about how The Simpsons had predicted Trump's presidency all the way back in 2000. Dan Greaney gave interviews saying the episode was meant as a warning to America. 4 days after the election, The Simpsons responded in the only way they knew how. In the episode, quote, 148, which aired on November 13, 2016, the chalkboard gag in the opening credits showed Bart writing underscore, quote, underscore 149 underscore. And then, in 2024, Trump was elected president again. The prediction that seemed impossible in 2000 had now come true twice. The Disney-Fox merger is another prediction that shocked people. In the 1998 episode, quote, 150, there is a brief visual gag at the end of the episode. A sign is shown outside a studio building that reads underscore, quote, underscore 151 underscore. In 1998, this was nothing more than a quick joke about the idea of corporate giants swallowing up their competitors. Disney was already a massive company, having acquired Capital Cities and ABC in 1995, so the joke was really just a comment about how big companies keep getting bigger. Nobody took it seriously. Then, in December 2017, the Walt Disney Company announced it was acquiring 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets in a deal worth over $71 billion. The deal was completed, and suddenly The Simpsons, the show that had built Fox into a major network, was owned by Disney. The joke had become reality, almost 20 years later. Then there's the Cypress Hill prediction. In the 1996 episode, quote, 152, there is a joke where the hip-hop group Cypress Hill, while not in the clearest state of mind, accidentally books a performance with the London Symphony Orchestra. It was an absurd joke, the kind of random pairing that only The Simpsons would think of. Fast forward 28 years to July 10, 2024, and Cypress Hill actually performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall in London, one of the most famous music venues in the world. They played several of their biggest hits backed by a full orchestra. The rapper Be Real from Cypress Hill told the BBC that performing with the London Symphony Orchestra had been something the group had talked about for years since the Simpsons episode first aired, calling it very special. The show didn't just predict this one, it inspired it. The joke literally made the real thing happen. Technology predictions are where The Simpsons really starts to feel eerie. In the 1995 episode Lisa's Wedding, which shows a vision of Lisa's life in the year 2010, characters are seen using what looks remarkably like video calling. People talk to each other face to face through screens, years before FaceTime or Skype made this an everyday reality. In the same episode, and in others from the mid-1990s, characters are shown wearing what appear to be smartwatches, small computer screens worn on the wrist. The Apple Watch wouldn't be released until 2015, 2 decades after The Simpsons showed something that looked almost exactly like it. These weren't wild science fiction ideas either. They were presented casually, as if, of course, this is what the future would look like. And they were right. In the 1998 episode, quote, 154, Homer Simpson is shown standing in front of a blackboard covered in equations. One of those equations, according to physicist and author Simon Singh, comes remarkably close to predicting the mass of the Higgs boson particle. The Higgs boson is a tiny, fundamental building block of matter that scientists had been searching for but had not yet discovered. It wouldn't be confirmed to exist until 2012, 14 years after Homer scribbled that equation on a blackboard as a joke. This wasn't an accident. The Simpsons writing staff included several people with advanced degrees in mathematics and physics from places like Harvard. Writer David X. Cohen, who has a degree in physics, reportedly consulted a physicist friend to create an equation that would be both funny and scientifically grounded. It was an incredibly educated joke. But the fact that a cartoon character accidentally almost predicted the mass of one of the most important discoveries in modern physics is still remarkable. The show also seemed to predict a tiger attack on a famous Las Vegas performer. In the 1993 episode quote, _155__2, performers named Gunter and Ernst, a clear parody of the real-life Las Vegas act Siegfried and Roy, are attacked by their own white tiger during a show. 10 years later, in October 2003, Roy Horn of Siegfried and Roy was attacked by one of his white tigers during a live performance, suffering critical injuries that ended the act permanently. The Simpsons version was meant as a joke about the obvious danger of working with wild animals, but the similarity to what actually happened a decade later was unsettling. Autocorrect is another one. In a 1994 episode, a character uses a handheld digital device that automatically changes what they type into something completely different and wrong. This was years before smartphones existed and long before autocorrect became one of the most universally frustrating features of modern technology. Anyone who has ever sent a text message and had their phone change a perfectly normal word into something embarrassing knows exactly what The Simpsons was joking about in 1994. The writers saw where technology was heading and imagined the most annoying possible version of it, and they nailed it. Now, the important thing to understand is that The Simpsons isn't actually able to see the future. The show's own creators have been very clear about this. Al Jean, one of the longest-running executive producers on the show, has explained that these apparent predictions are really just educated guesses. He has said that if you throw enough darts, you're going to get some bullseyes. Producer Bill Oakley put it even more directly, stating that there are very few cases where The Simpsons truly predicted something, and that it's mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. Fact-checking organizations like Snopes have pointed out that with over 800 episodes containing thousands and thousands of jokes, storylines, and visual gags, the odds of some of them overlapping with real events aren't actually as small as people think. And they're right. The writers weren't using a crystal ball. They were using intelligence, observation, and a deep understanding of how the world works. The writing staff has always been filled with people from top universities who studied mathematics, science, history, and political science. When they wrote jokes about technology, they based them on real trends that were already emerging. When they wrote jokes about politics, they based them on the real behavior of real political figures. When they joked about corporate mergers, they were commenting on patterns that were already visible in the business world. The Simpsons predicts the future for the same reason it's a great show. Because its writers are incredibly smart people who pay close attention to the world around them and take what they see to its logical extreme. But here's the thing. Even knowing all of that, even understanding the math and the logic and the probability behind it, the predictions are still amazing. Because no other show has this many of them. No other show has been on long enough, been smart enough, and been fearless enough to make the kinds of jokes that end up mirroring reality decades later. South Park makes fun of current events. Saturday Night Live responds to the news of the week. The Simpsons made jokes in 1996 and 1998 and 2000 that didn't come true until 2016 and 2017 and 2024. That gap, that distance between the joke and the reality, is what makes The Simpsons' predictions so powerful. It's not that the writers knew the future. It's that they understood the present so well that the future became obvious to them before it was obvious to anyone else. The predictions also demonstrate something deeper about the show itself. They show that The Simpsons wasn't just making jokes for the sake of making jokes. Every prediction that came true was rooted in a real observation about the real world. The Trump joke was rooted in an observation about the direction of American politics and celebrity culture. The Disney-Fox joke was rooted in an observation about corporate power and media consolidation. The technology jokes were rooted in observations about where science and innovation were heading. The Simpsons was always watching the world, always thinking about where things were going, and always packaging those observations into comedy that felt absurd at the time, but turned out to be anything but. The internet has turned the show's predictions into a global phenomenon. Every time something happens in the news that even vaguely resembles something from a Simpsons episode, clips go viral within minutes. Social media accounts dedicated entirely to tracking Simpsons predictions have millions of followers. It has become a cultural reflex. Something strange happens in the world, and the first thing people say is, "Did The Simpsons predict this?" Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no, and the supposed prediction turns out to be a fake image or a misremembered scene. But the fact that The Simpsons is the first show people think of when reality gets strange tells you something about its place in our culture. No other show is trusted, even jokingly, to have already shown us what's coming next. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The predictions are funny. They're fascinating, they're sometimes a little unsettling, but more than anything, they're proof that The Simpsons was always doing something deeper than just making people laugh. It was holding up a mirror to society and showing us who we really are. And sometimes, when a show understands people that well, the line between comedy and commentary starts to disappear completely. Which brings us to something the show has been doing from its very first episode and has never stopped doing. Using comedy not just to make people laugh, but to say things about the world that no other show had the courage to say. Section 11. Social commentary ahead of its time. There are shows that make you laugh. There are shows that make you think. And then there is The Simpsons, which figured out how to do both at the same time in a way that no other show on television had ever done before. From its earliest seasons, The Simpsons was never just a cartoon about a funny family. It was a show that used comedy as a weapon. It took the biggest, most important, most uncomfortable topics in American society. Topics that most shows were terrified to go near, and it made people laugh about them. And in doing so, it made people think about them in ways they never had before. The reason The Simpsons could pull this off when other shows couldn't is built right into the structure of the show itself. Because The Simpsons is animated, it has a layer of protection that live-action shows don't have. When a cartoon character does something controversial, audiences are more willing to go along with it. The bright colors and exaggerated faces create a kind of safety net. People let their guard down, and once their guard is down, The Simpsons hits them with ideas and observations that would cause outrage on any other show. The writers understood this from the very beginning, and they used it to talk about things that mattered. One of the earliest and most direct examples came in Season 3. The episode __, quote _157 __, which aired on September 26, 1991, followed Lisa as she writes a patriotic essay that wins her family a trip to Washington, D.C. Lisa is thrilled. She believes in America with her whole heart. But while in the Capitol, she witnesses her local congressman taking a bribe in exchange for allowing a company to tear down a forest. Lisa's faith in democracy is destroyed. She tears up her original essay and writes a new one, calling out the corruption she witnessed. The episode aired during a time when trust in government was already falling in America, and it captured something that millions of people were feeling, but few shows were willing to say out loud. That the people who run the country don't always have the country's best interests in mind. Lisa was 8 years old, and she was seeing what many adults refused to see. It was funny, it was heartbreaking, and it was one of the first signals that The Simpsons was going to use its platform to say something real. The show tackled animal rights and the food industry in Season 7 with Lisa the Vegetarian, which aired on October 15, 1995. In the episode, Lisa visits a petting zoo with her family and bonds with a baby lamb. When they get home and sit down to eat lamb chops for dinner, something clicks in her mind. She can't do it anymore. She stops eating meat. And then the real story begins. Because nobody supports her. Homer makes fun of her. Bart makes fun of her. Her classmates make fun of her. Even the school shows a propaganda film mocking vegetarianism. Lisa is completely alone in her decision, and the show lets you feel every bit of that isolation. What makes this episode truly special is what happened behind the scenes. Paul McCartney, the former Beatle and one of the most famous musicians in history, agreed to guest star in the episode along with his wife Linda McCartney. Both were lifelong vegetarians and passionate animal rights advocates. But McCartney had one condition. He would only appear on the show if Lisa remained a vegetarian for the rest of the series. Not for one episode, not for one season, forever. The producers agreed, and Lisa has been a vegetarian ever since. It was one of the only permanent character changes in the history of The Simpsons, a show famous for resetting everything back to normal at the end of every episode. McCartney still checks in with the show's producers to make sure they've kept their promise. As showrunner David Merkin told the Radio Times, __, quote, _159 __. The episode won an Environmental Media Award and a Genesis Award from the Humane Society, and it introduced millions of viewers, many of them kids, to the idea that choosing not to eat meat was a valid and respectable decision. Then came immigration. On May 5, 1996, The Simpsons aired, quote, 160, quote, one of the sharpest political episodes in the show's history. The story begins with a bear wandering into Springfield. Just one bear, a single harmless bear. But the town panics, and an angry mob demands the mayor do something. Mayor Quimby, always looking for the easy way out, creates a bear patrol with high-tech equipment that raises everyone's taxes by $5. When the citizens get angry about the tax increase, Quimby blames the whole thing on immigrants. He creates Proposition 24, a ballot measure to deport all undocumented immigrants from Springfield. The town goes along with it without thinking. Signs go up everywhere. Even normally kind characters start treating their immigrant neighbors horribly. The episode was written by David X. Cohen, who based it partly on California's Proposition 187, a real ballot measure from 1994 that proposed denying government services to undocumented immigrants. The brilliance of the episode is in how it shows the chain of manipulation. A bear appears. People get scared. The government creates an expensive solution. People get angry about the cost. The government blames immigrants. People turn on their neighbors. Each step follows logically from the last, and each step is completely ridiculous. Homer starts out fully supporting Proposition 24, but when he learns that his friend Apu is an undocumented immigrant whose visa expired years ago, everything changes. Homer helps Apu study for his citizenship test, and at the end of the episode, Homer gives what might be the most sincere speech of his life, telling his neighbors that immigrants are the people who help the country thrive. They all agree to vote no on Proposition 24. And then the proposition passes anyway, with 95% of the vote. That ending is what separates The Simpsons from every other show. It doesn't pretend that one man's change of heart can fix a broken system. It shows you the truth, and the truth is sometimes ugly. The show went even further in Season 8 with Homer's Phobia, which aired on February 16, 1997. This was the first episode of The Simpsons to deal entirely with gay themes. The story is simple. The Simpson family meets a man named John, a charming and funny novelty shop owner voiced by legendary filmmaker John Waters. Homer loves John. They become friends. They dance together. They have a great time. And then Homer finds out that John is gay. Overnight, Homer's entire attitude changes. He becomes terrified that spending time with John will somehow turn Bart gay. So he drags Bart on a series of overly masculine activities to make sure his son grows up straight. The episode is hilarious, but it's also doing something incredibly brave for 1997. At the time, only 42% of Americans believed that same-sex relations between adults should even be legal. Support for gay marriage sat at just 27%. Representation of gay characters on television was extremely rare, and Fox's own censors tried to stop the episode from airing entirely. According to showrunner Bill Oakley, the censors sent back notes objecting to almost every single line in the script. Their final paragraph stated that the entire subject and content of the episode was unacceptable for broadcast. Oakley and his co-showrunner Josh Weinstein pushed ahead with production anyway, and after a change in Fox's staff, the episode was finally cleared for broadcast. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The episode won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program and a GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding TV Individual Episode. John Waters himself praised the approach, saying that the only way to change anyone's opinion is to make them laugh first. The key to the episode's success is that it never makes fun of John for being gay. Instead, it makes fun of Homer for being afraid. Homer's fear, his ignorance, his desperate attempts to make Bart more masculine, these are what the audience laughs at. The message was clear. The problem isn't the gay man. The problem is the person who can't accept him. In 1997, that was a revolutionary thing for a primetime animated show to say. The Simpsons addressed gun ownership in Season 9 with, quote, 162, which aired on November 2, 1997. After a soccer match turns into a citywide riot, Homer buys a handgun to protect his family. Marge is horrified, but Homer falls in love with the power the gun gives him. He uses it to open beer cans. He uses it to turn off the television. He stores it in the vegetable drawer of the refrigerator, where Bart and Milhouse find it. Marge eventually leaves and takes the children with her. What makes the episode remarkable is its refusal to take a simple side. The writing staff was genuinely split on the issue. Writer John Swartzwelder, who wrote the script, was pro-gun. Show creator Matt Groening was firmly against guns. The episode was designed to be fair to both perspectives. Homer is obviously reckless and should not own a firearm. But the NRA members in the episode are portrayed as responsible gun owners who are genuinely shocked by Homer's behavior. They kick him out of their group for being dangerous. At the end, Homer's NRA friends actually help stop a robbery. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette praised the episode, calling The Simpsons the only sitcom in memory to treat gun control with any fairness. Meanwhile, the real National Rifle Association sent angry complaints to the show's staff, which showrunner Mike Scully found ironic. As he put it, "We were actually making their argument for them." The episode was also initially refused broadcast by the British satellite channel Sky One due to its depictions of gun misuse. The show's 200th episode, quote, 164, which aired on April 26, 1998, took on consumerism, populist politics, and environmental destruction all at once. The episode begins with a department store inventing a fake holiday called Love Day to boost summer sales. The mountains of packaging and waste from Love Day set off a chain of events that leads to Homer running for sanitation commissioner. His campaign slogan, __quote, _165 __, captures everything wrong with how people deal with problems they don't want to think about. Homer wins in a landslide by making impossible promises, spends the entire year's budget in 1 month, and then secretly sells access to Springfield's abandoned mines so other cities can dump their garbage there. The trash eventually erupts from the ground and destroys the town. Steve Martin guest starred as the competent incumbent commissioner who tries to warn everyone, and when the town begs him to come back after Homer's disaster, his response is devastating. He walks up to the podium and simply says, __quote _166 __. The episode wasn't originally intended to carry an environmental message, but the staff realized that the ending, where a town is literally buried in its own garbage because its citizens chose convenience over responsibility, worked perfectly as one. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, and the political commentary has only become more relevant over time. A candidate with no experience runs for office, makes wild promises, wins because people are angry and want easy answers, and then everything falls apart. The writers weren't predicting any specific politician. They were describing a pattern of human behavior that repeats itself over and over. Across all of these episodes, The Simpsons followed the same approach. It never lectured, it never preached, it never stood on a soapbox and told the audience what to think. Instead, it built a world that felt real, filled it with characters that felt human, and then put those characters in situations that forced audiences to confront uncomfortable truths. Homer's fear of John in Homer's Phobia isn't presented as evil, it's presented as ignorant, and ignorance is something that can change. Homer's support for Proposition 24 in __quote _168 isn't presented as hateful. It's presented as the product of manipulation, and manipulation is something people can learn to recognize. The show trusted its audience to be smart enough to get the message without having it spelled out. And the audience, millions of them, got it. The commentary wasn't limited to big, headline-grabbing issues either. The Simpsons consistently poked at the everyday systems that people take for granted. It made fun of the American education system through Springfield Elementary, where teachers are underpaid, students are ignored, and the curriculum is built around standardized testing rather than actual learning. It made fun of the healthcare system through Dr. Nick Riviera, whose medical competence was questionable but whose prices were unbeatable. It made fun of organized religion, corporate greed, media sensationalism, political corruption, celebrity worship, and the justice system. No institution was safe. No topic was off limits. And because it was a cartoon, because it was The Simpsons, it got away with saying things that would have ended any other show. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This is what made The Simpsons more than entertainment. It was a mirror held up to the real world. And for millions of viewers, seeing their society reflected back at them through the citizens of Springfield was the first time they truly understood how that society worked. The show didn't just comment on the culture, it shaped it. And when you combine everything, the comedy, the characters, the predictions, the language, the awards, the cultural impact, the social commentary, you start to understand why so many people believe that what The Simpsons accomplished can never be accomplished again. Which brings us to the final question, the one that every fan of this show has asked at some point. Can anything ever match what The Simpsons did? And the answer might be harder to hear than you think. Section 12. Why nothing will ever match it. Here is the truth, and it's a truth that most people don't want to hear. There will never be another show like The Simpsons. Not because people won't try. They will. They already have. And some of those shows have been great. But the specific combination of factors that created The Simpsons, the exact set of circumstances that allowed it to become what it became, those conditions no longer exist. They can't exist. The world that made The Simpsons possible is gone. And understanding why that's the case is the final piece of understanding why this show matters more than any other show in the history of television. Start with the numbers, because the numbers alone tell an impossible story. As of February 2026, The Simpsons has aired 805 episodes across 37 seasons. It is currently in its 37th season, which began airing on September 28, 2025. In April 2025, Disney renewed the show for 4 more seasons, taking it all the way through season 40, which will coincide with the show's 40th anniversary. That renewal will push the total episode count past 850. The Simpsons is the longest-running American animated series. It is the longest-running American sitcom. It is the longest-running American scripted primetime television series, a record it took from Gunsmoke in 2009 when it entered its 21st season. And it later passed Gunsmoke's 635 episode count in 2018. No other scripted show in the history of American primetime television has lasted this long. No other scripted show has produced this many episodes, and no other scripted show has maintained anything close to this level of cultural relevance for this long. And the voice cast. Think about this. The 6 principal voice actors on The Simpsons are Dan Castellaneta, Julie Kavner, Nancy Cartwright, Yardley Smith, Hank Azaria, and Harry Shearer. Castellaneta and Kavner have been voicing Homer and Marge since the animated shorts on The Tracy Ullman Show, which first aired on April 19, 1987. That means the same actor has been voicing Homer Simpson for nearly 39 years. The same actor has been voicing Marge for nearly 39 years. Cartwright has been Bart for just as long. Smith has been Lisa for just as long. These are not just voice actors playing roles. These are human beings who have spent their entire adult careers bringing these characters to life. That kind of continuity doesn't happen anymore. In a world where TV shows get canceled after one season on a streaming platform, the idea of the same cast performing the same roles for nearly 4 decades is almost unthinkable. Now consider what the show has accomplished across those decades. 37 Primetime Emmy Awards, making it the most decorated animated series in television history. 34 Annie Awards. 2 Peabody Awards, including the rare Institutional Award in 2020, which recognized The Simpsons as likely the most globally recognized television show in world history. A Hollywood Walk of Fame star. Over 700 guest stars. Words added to the Oxford English Dictionary and Merriam-Webster. A feature film, The Simpsons Movie, released in 2007, which earned over $526 million at the worldwide box office, with a sequel officially announced and scheduled for release in 2027. Time magazine named it the best television series of the entire 20th century. In December 2025, The Simpsons surpassed 1 billion streams on Disney+. The show isn't just still on the air, it's still being watched by massive audiences around the world, nearly 4 decades after it started. So why can't this be done again? The first and most obvious reason is the way television has changed. When The Simpsons premiered on December 17, 1989, there were 4 major broadcast networks in America. 4. If you wanted to watch something on a weeknight, you chose between ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. That was it. Cable television existed, but it was nothing like what it would become. Streaming didn't exist. The internet barely existed. When The Simpsons aired on Sunday nights, it wasn't competing against thousands of other shows. It was competing against a handful, and it was winning. Bart Simpson t-shirts sold by the millions because there were only so many things for people to pay attention to, and The Simpsons was one of them. Today, the opposite is true. There are hundreds of cable channels. There are dozens of streaming platforms. Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Apple TV+, Paramount+, Peacock, and more. Every single one of them is producing original content. Every single one of them is fighting for attention. A viewer in 2026 has more entertainment options available to them in a single evening than a viewer in 1990 had in an entire year. This means that no show, no matter how good it is, can ever dominate the culture the way The Simpsons did. It's not possible. The audience is too spread out. The attention is too divided. A show can be excellent and still only be watched by a fraction of the people who watched The Simpsons in its golden age. The second reason is the writer's room. The Simpsons writer's room during the golden age, roughly seasons 3 through 8, was one of the most talented collections of comedy writers ever assembled in one place. Conan O'Brien, who went on to become one of the most famous talk show hosts in television history, Greg Daniels, who created The Office and Parks and Recreation, Brad Bird, who directed The Incredibles and Ratatouille, David X. Cohen, who co-created Futurama, John Swartzwelder, widely considered one of the greatest sitcom writers who ever lived, Al Jean, Mike Reiss, Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, George Meyer, Ian Maxtone Graham, and many more. Many of these writers had degrees from Harvard, including several with backgrounds in mathematics and physics. They were some of the smartest, funniest people in the entire entertainment industry, and they were all in the same room at the same time, working on the same show. That kind of concentration of talent was possible in the early 1990s because there were fewer places for talented writers to go. Television animation was not a respected field. Adult animation barely existed. The Simpsons was one of the only games in town for a certain kind of brilliant, offbeat comedy writer. Today, those same writers would have hundreds of options. They could create their own shows on any number of platforms. They could write for streaming series, write films, produce podcasts, or build entire media companies. The talent pool hasn't gotten smaller, it's gotten more spread out, and that means no single show can ever assemble the kind of writer's room that The Simpsons had in its prime. The third reason is time. The Simpsons came along at exactly the right moment in television history. It arrived after decades of mostly safe, mostly predictable sitcoms. The 1980s were dominated by shows like The Cosby Show, Family Ties, and Full House. These were good shows, some of them great shows, but they played by the rules. They didn't challenge the audience. They didn't push boundaries. And then The Simpsons showed up, and it broke every rule there was. It was the first primetime animated show aimed at adults in over 20 years. It was the first animated sitcom without a laugh track. It satirized politics, religion, corporations, and the media at a time when doing so on television was genuinely risky. It was shocking, not because it was crude, but because it was honest, and there was nothing else like it. The audience had been waiting for something like The Simpsons without knowing they were waiting. Today, that element of surprise is impossible to recreate. Adult animation is everywhere. Edgy comedy is everywhere. Social commentary is everywhere. South Park, Family Guy, Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, Archer, Bob's Burgers, Big Mouth, and dozens of other shows have all explored territory that The Simpsons opened up. That's not a criticism of those shows. Many of them are excellent, but they all exist because The Simpsons came first. The door that The Simpsons kicked open in 1989 is now so wide that anyone can walk through it, and that means no new show can ever have the same impact, because the impact has already been made. The fourth reason is cultural unity. When The Simpsons was at its peak, America still had shared cultural moments. Tens of millions of people watched the same shows at the same time on the same night and talked about them the next day at work and at school. That shared experience is what allowed catchphrases like "Dough" and "Don't have a cow, man" and "Eat my shorts" to spread across the country. It's what allowed Bart Mania to explode into a phenomenon where millions of t-shirts were sold in a single year. It's what made The Simpsons feel like it belonged to everyone. Today, culture is fragmented in ways that make that kind of universal experience almost impossible. People watch different things at different times on different platforms. Two people can live in the same house and never watch the same show. A great series in 2026 might be loved by millions and still be completely unknown to millions more. The Simpsons existed in the last era where a television show could truly be everywhere, all at once, for everyone. And the fifth reason, maybe the most important reason of all, is that The Simpsons changed things permanently. Before The Simpsons, there was no adult animation on primetime television. After The Simpsons, there was an entire industry. Before The Simpsons, cartoons were considered children's entertainment. After The Simpsons, animated shows won Peabody Awards and were named the best series on television by Time magazine. Before The Simpsons, nobody believed a cartoon could be smart, funny, emotional, political, and commercially dominant all at the same time. After The Simpsons, everyone knew it could. The show didn't just succeed, it changed the definition of what success looked like for an animated series, and you can only change the definition once. Every show that came after The Simpsons benefits from the revolution it started, but no show can start that revolution again. It's already happened. Think about what that means when you put it all together. Over 800 episodes, nearly 40 years on the air. The same voice cast from the very beginning. 37 Emmys, 2 Peabody Awards, words in the dictionary, a feature film that made over $500 million, the show that saved Fox, the show that predicted Trump, the show that proved animation is a medium and not a genre, the show that changed the English language, the show that held up a mirror to American society and made people laugh while they looked at their own reflection. No other show in history has done all of that. And the mathematical reality is that no other show ever will, because the conditions that made it possible, the small number of networks, the concentration of talent, the cultural unity, the element of being first, those conditions are gone forever. But here's the thing that matters most. None of that means The Simpsons is over. The show is still on the air. New episodes are still being made. The same actors who started voicing these characters in 1987 are still showing up to the microphone. A second movie is coming. Millions of people are still streaming the show every single day. Kids who weren't born when the Golden Age ended are discovering it for the first time on Disney Plus and falling in love with it the same way their parents did and the same way their grandparents did. The Simpsons isn't just the greatest show that ever was, it's the greatest show that still is. And if you've made it this far, if you've been listening to this whole video, then you already know why. Because there's Homer, sitting on his couch, eating his donut, watching his television, living his simple, flawed, ridiculous, deeply human life. And there's Marge, holding the family together with nothing but patience and a tower of blue hair. And there's Bart, carving his name into everything he touches. And there's Lisa, fighting for a world that doesn't deserve her yet. And there's Maggie, watching all of it, taking it all in, saying nothing, but understanding everything. They're not real. They never were. They're drawings on a screen, lines on paper, colors filled in by animators on the other side of the world. But they feel real. They have always felt real. And that is the single greatest achievement of The Simpsons. In a world full of real people telling real stories, a family of yellow cartoon characters with 4 fingers on each hand became the most honest reflection of who we are that television has ever produced. Nothing will ever match it. And honestly, nothing needs to. Because The Simpsons already did everything a television show could possibly do. And then it did a little more. And then, somehow, impossibly, it kept going. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. I have another deep dive coming soon that I think you are really going to enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.